Sunny slept for a long time, the exhaustion slowly leaving his battered body. After a while, though, his consciousness rose from the deepest layers of slumber, summoned back by pain and thirst. With a sigh, he turned to his other side and tried to go back to sleep. After a few more hours of tossing and turning, though, Sunny was finally awoken by the loud sound of something crashing to the floor. He wondered what Saint was doing. He reluctantly opened his eyes and sat up, as Sunny's weight shifted. The bed beneath him suddenly broke with a loud crack. He rolled onto the floor with a startled yelp. Standing up, Sunny looked at the broken bed, then at the hall of the Obsidian Tower, which was now submerged in darkness. A bewildered expression appeared on his face. The room he had entered before had gone through a dramatic transformation while he was asleep. The magical lanterns were now extinguished, and everything inside seemed dilapidated and decrepit, almost on the verge of crumbling to pieces. The magnificent tools and implements had rusted through and deformed. The worktable had collapsed under its own weight. That was the sound which had awoken Sunny. The food he had enjoyed yesterday had turned to dust. The pristine condition of the hall was gone, and now it was full of darkness, debris, and dirt. It was as though eons had passed since he fell asleep. A cold feeling appeared in his chest. He wondered if he had slept for 1,000 years. Remembering fairy tales where similar things often happened, Sunny felt a hint of horror, but then thought about it for a few moments and calmed down. No, he had not. Judging by how much shadow essence had accumulated in his cores, he slept for about 24 hours straight, which was a lot, but nowhere near 1,000 years. Saint, who was keeping watch nearby, also didn't look as though she had been guarding him for a few centuries. Instead, it was the pagoda itself that had aged, as though an invisible seal that had kept it untouched by the passage of time for all those thousands of years was now broken, and time was finally catching up with it. Time was the most relentless destroyer after all. Sunny sighed with relief, then grimaced. Sunny muttered, "Curses! I should have eaten more yesterday. Much, much more. All that delicious food, wasted." Shaking his head dejectedly, Sunny looked around, then accessed his own state. His wounds were already much better than they had been the day before. The burns were still rather painful, but within his capacity to endure without being slowed down in battle. Too much. A couple more days of rest, and he would be close to being fully functional again. He was really hungry, though, but that was going to have to wait. Summoning the moonlight shard, Sunny gave Saint a command to follow, and went to explore the Obsidian Tower. It took Sunny about an hour to fully explore the first level of the ancient pagoda. Some of the doors in the outer corridor had collapsed and turned to dust. Some remained standing and required him to use a tiny bit of shadow essence to unlock them. Behind the doors were all kinds of rooms. Most of them were empty, suggesting that the master of the tower had moved away a long time ago, taking all the valuable things with him, while some contained weathered debris and dust. Sunny spent a lot of time trying to understand what all these things had once been. By the damage done by the accelerated time was too extensive to even guess. He felt it was a shame. Feeling strangely disappointed, Sunny decided that it was time to move on to other levels of the tower. He still had to find the thing that had pulled him toward this place, as well as, hopefully, some means of returning either to the chained isles or to the real world. The idea of being stuck on this island forever did not seem very appealing, especially now that there was no food anywhere around. Not finding anything interesting on the first level, Sunny decided to explore further. From the outside, it had seemed as though the Obsidian Tower had 6 levels, which really surprised Sunny. He had expected there to be 7. However, after finding 2 stairwells, one stair leading up, the other down, he realized that there was an underground level too, which explained this small discrepancy. Everything having to do with the spell and the dream realm had a tendency to be tied to the number 7, except the gods, of whom there had been only 6. Sunny mused, "I guess that's why they are called gods. No law can bind them. Not even such a weird and random law as all things coming in 7s. Sunny looked up, then looked down, and decided to explore the underground level first. Letting Saint go ahead, he entered the spiraling staircase and descended into the depths of the dark island. Unlike the ground level, the basement of the Obsidian Tower turned out to be one giant hall, and in it, Sunny recoiled. For a second, it seemed as though hundreds of dismembered corpses were piled at the center of the hall, forming a morbid hill. But as Sunny took a step back and instinctively raised the moonlight shard, he realized that he made a mistake. The bodies piled in the center of the chamber were not that of people. Instead, they were dolls. Hundreds of broken porcelain dolls, each the size of a human, were discarded in the underground hall. Their fragile bodies were shattered and broken, laying there like abandoned toys. Some were missing limbs, some were left with gaping holes in their torsos. Some had long ago turned into piles of small fragments, with not even their faces remaining. But those faces that did remain. Sunny tilted his head, then glanced at Saint. Every broken doll had the same face, or rather, all of their faces looked alike, as though they were all imperfect copies of the same original. They had the same flawless, inhumanly beautiful features that Saint had, only the craftsmanship behind the faces of the broken dolls seemed much less refined, as though the sculptor had not yet perfected his skill when creating them. They all looked like Saint's lesser siblings. If Sunny ever had doubts that the Obsidian Tower had once belonged to a certain underworld demon, now there were none. The last child of the unknown had clearly spent some time here, was probably the one who had created the Black Pagoda in the first place, for some mysterious purpose Sunny couldn't even begin to guess. Then, however, his attention was drawn to something else. The floor of the vast hall was covered by a thick layer of dust, which should not have been disturbed in a few thousand years. But it had been. A set of fleet footprints led all the way from the bottom of the stairs, where Sunny was standing, to the pile of broken dolls, circled it, and then mysteriously disappeared. Sunny stared at it for some few moments, surprised. Someone had entered the Obsidian Tower before him. Those broken dolls and that trail of footprints are a mystery worth chasing. Like this episode and subscribe for the next one. Now let's see who walked that dusty floor before Sunny did. Sunny stared at the footprints for some more, then frowned. Sunny asked, "How does this make any sense?" The Obsidian Tower had been sealed before he opened its gates. After he did so, the magic that had preserved everything inside was dispelled, which meant that those doors had not been opened in thousands of years. It wasn't that easy to gain entry into the pagoda to begin with, not even mentioning the fact that one had to travel through the sky below and find the only rift in the boundless ocean of divine flames. There was also the fact that the gate had to be opened by pouring essence into the weave of diamond strings beneath its surface. Sunny could only see the weave and understand its meaning a little, because his eyes had been transformed by the drop of Weaver's blood. He assumed that there were other awakened with similar abilities, but there had to be very, very few of them. And what were the chances that one would find their way to the dark island beyond the immolating sea of stars, which was hidden in the depths of this endless void? And how would they enter the pagoda without causing its seal to break? Sunny demanded. Just who was it that snuck into the Obsidian Tower unseen? And when? It had to have happened long before today. Sunny knew for a fact that Saint would not have let anyone come and go without waking him up. Neither would his shadows. Even when he slept, they were aware and vigilant. So, it could have happened at any point in the thousands of years since the tower had been abandoned by its rightful owner. For now, he had no answer. Feeling a little apprehensive, Sunny approached the pile of broken dolls and studied them for some time. Saint came closer, too, and stared at them silently. Then, she poked one with the tip of the midnight shard and turned away indifferently, as though losing all interest in the porcelain mannequins. He guessed she didn't care too much about lesser versions of herself. Saint had repeatedly shown her disdain toward things that seemed to be replicas of her kind. It had been the same with the Black Knight, and even with the walking colossus of the Forgotten Shore. Sunny clearly remembered how unimpressed his shadow had been with the awesome stone giant. Turning away from the broken dolls, Sunny looked around and noticed that the walls of the chamber were lined with massive glass vessels. Some were whole and some were broken, but all were empty. The glass was black and opaque, covered with a thick layer of soot. From the inside, he found that weird. not finding anything else of interest on the underground level. He returned to where he had started and rested for a while, drinking water from the endless spring and trying to suppress his hunger. Sunny muttered, "This place is so eerie." It was indeed. The Black Tower stood at the edge of an endless void of darkness, empty and abandoned, with everything inside of it made out of nothing by an inhuman mind. It was not a very welcoming place, at least not for humans. Sunny stared at the ancient walls that surrounded him and wondered about the secrets of the past. After a while, he stood up and cautiously headed for the second level of the Great Pagoda. As soon as Sunny set foot on it, though, he instantly felt that something was very, very wrong there. The feeling of deep, subtle, primordial terror he suddenly experienced was unlike anything he had known before, with the exception, perhaps, of those few moments back on the forgotten shore when the walking colossus had lifted the giant three-eyed skull from the depths of the dark sea. But here, this feeling was even more dire, even more invasive. Sunny breathed. What is this? Just like the underground level, this one consisted of only one great hall. The black walls rose high into the darkness, creating a magnificent and solemn atmosphere. At the center of it, cut into the obsidian floor, was a massive silver brazier, and in it, Sunny shuddered and took a step back. Something was growing from the brazier, spreading outward like a vile kind of rot. It had infected the very stone of the ancient tower, turning it into a semblance of repulsive, black, pulsating flesh. The silver brazier was infected by the terrifying growth, too, its metal somehow becoming a part of it. It seemed as though everything would become absorbed and transformed by the spreading corruption as long as it was touched by the harrowing growth. Entire worlds would be devoured by it, perhaps, if given chance. The thing slowly spreading from the ancient brazier felt like pure evil. Sunny shivered, gave Saint a signal to stay back, and shifted his gaze slightly. He was looking past spreading black flesh at the source of this harrowing infection. At the very center of the brazier, blackened by the flames that must have raged in it once, lay a severed human arm. Well, it resembled that of a human at least. The arm was much longer than it should have been, and the hand had 7 fingers that ended with sharp claws. The rot seemed to be spreading from a terrible torn wound on the forearm to the charred and emaciated flesh, and then outward to everything else around it. Despite the repugnant state of the severed arm, the cut that separated it at the shoulder seemed clean and perfectly smooth, as though delivered by a steady and unfaltering blade. But Sunny was more affected in something else. A deep frown appeared on his face when he noticed it. In his mind's eye, the vile arm was radiating a blindingly bright, overwhelming, beautiful golden radiance. It was awash in the light of divinity. A frightening thought appeared in Sunny's head. Sunny whispered, Can it be?" In front of him, stricken by the harrowing rot, was a severed arm of a deity. It was also the reason why fate had brought him to this lost and forgotten corner of the abyss. Sunny stared at the severed arm of an unknown deity, then at the harrowing, profane rot spreading from it. Then he tiredly rubbed his face. He wondered why nothing could ever be easy. He was sure that his fate was somehow connected to that arm, which meant that he was going to have to get to it somehow. But Sunny was also sure that there weren't enough rewards in all of the universe to make him go anywhere near that rot, let alone touch something infected by it. He had the feeling that this thing was way out of his league. In fact, he suspected that a divine being had ruthlessly severed their own arm, because even someone as powerful as that had no means to resist that spreading corruption. What was Sunny supposed to do then? Well, trying to remain as far from the rot as possible, he studied it for a while before coming to a strange conclusion, or rather a strange question. If the corruption was so terrible, then why had it not spread through the entire tower? Why had it only managed to crawl a few meters out of the silver brazier, turning a small portion of the second level of the pagoda into its flesh? Sunny added, Scratch that. Why didn't the whole island become one giant chunk of rotten black? Whatever the hell that thing is. The answer was not hard to guess. It was because the rot, just like everything else inside the tower, had been sealed away from time for thousands of years. And now that Sunny had broken that seal, His frown deepened as he glanced at the silver hearth that was overgrown and had become a part of the spreading rot. Now, there were only two possibilities. Time was going to catch up to the devouring corruption, and it was either going to slowly consume everything, or starve and die. Could that thing last for thousands of years with nothing to feed on except for cold stone? Did it need to feed on flesh and souls, or would anything do? He supposed he was going to find out. Keeping an eye on the patch of harrowing rot, Sonny tried to suppress his fear and took a step forward. It didn't seem like the rot was spreading, at least not yet. In any case, he wasn't going to get closer to it. But he also knew that if the worst happened, he had no tool at his disposal that would save him. If that thing began to grow, slowly spreading across the whole of the Obsidian Tower, and then across the whole island, Sonny was simply going to die. Probably jump down into nothingness to avoid becoming a part of that thing. There was nowhere else to retreat to in the sky below, after all, and he doubted that he would be able to find a second secret island out there in the void. So, his only hope was to find something inside the pagoda to save him. He had to explore further. Plus, there was a possibility that the rot would swiftly wither and die. Not that Sonny would bet on it. Pressing his back against the cold obsidian, Sonny dismissed Saint and skirted around the outer wall of the great hall until he reached the staircase that led higher to the third level. There, he summoned the taciturn demon again, hesitated for a bit, and then left one of his shadows to keep an eye on the devouring rot. Feeling irrational panic at the thought of turning his back to the silver brazier, Sonny gritted his teeth and then cautiously ascended the spiraling stairs. As soon as the terrible thing disappeared from view, he let out a relieved sigh and realized that his entire body was covered in a cold sweat. Raising a trembling hand, Sonny wiped his face and then continued to climb higher. Saint being by his side gave him a little confidence, at least. The shadows seemed absolutely unperturbed by the horrific visage they had left behind. He wondered if fear could even fit into that stone head of hers, and whether shadows had the ability to be afraid. He didn't know whether or not Saint could feel fear, but the gloomy shadow certainly could. In fact, behind its haughty exterior, it was rather cowardly. He was sure that the bastard would have been trembling all over if not for the fact that it was currently wrapped around his body. Trying to distract himself with these thoughts, Sonny entered the third level of the Obsidian Tower and froze, dumbfounded by what he saw there. Sonny muttered, I see. Wait, no. What the hell am I looking at? The chamber he found himself in was smaller than the previous 3 halls he had explored, mostly because the pagoda narrowed the higher it went, but also because the level was separated into several chambers. And in that chamber in particular, dozens of porcelain's arms floated in the air, each at a different level of being disassembled into tiny parts. It was as though someone had stolen them from the pile of broken dolls in the basement of the Obsidian Tower and then brought them here too. To do what exactly? Sonny stared at the floating garden of disassembled arms and then walked closer. He felt as though he was in some bizarre anatomy museum. As it turns out, the porcelain dolls were much more complex than he had thought. In their disassembled state, their limbs showed how intricate the design was and how many moving parts went into making each one as functional and articulated as that of a human. The joints in particular seemed like a marvel of engineering, not to mention the incredibly delicate weave of the diamond string beneath. Even Spelltech automatons could not boast of that level of ingenuity and intricacy. But why were these arms brought here and taken apart? Who had done it? The prince of the underworld himself. It didn't look like it. Why would he need to study his abandoned creations? It all became clearer when Sonny reached a stone pedestal standing at the far end of the chamber and saw a faint golden light emanating from a small object laying on it. On the surface of the table were numerous parts that had been scavenged from the disassembled porcelain arms, several skeins of beautiful diamond string, and a long, narrow needle. It was the needle that gave off a faint, weak radiance. Sonny looked at the needle, then glanced at the floating porcelain arms, noting for the first time that each was missing a part or two. Finally, different pieces of information connected in his mind, and he felt that he understood something about what had transpired in the Obsidian Tower. sometime after the prince of the underworld had left this hidden island. Perhaps years, or perhaps thousands of years. An uninvited guest had snuck into the Black Pagoda like a thief, somehow getting past the closed gates without ever opening them or disturbing the seal that had been preserving this place from being ravaged by time. That thief was a divine creature themselves, and also horribly wounded. One of their arms had been torn open and infected by the spreading rot that no one, not even a deity like them, could expel. That was why the thief had severed their infected arm at the shoulder and tossed it into the divine flame that had been burning in the silver brazier on the second level, and then went down to the basement to collect limbs from the broken porcelain dolls. It was that deity that had circled the pile of them and left the footprints in the dust for Sunny to notice. In the end, the thief ascended to the third floor and fashioned a new arm for themselves from the parts of the prince's discarded mannequins, and then sewn it onto their body with the diamond strings threaded through a sharp needle. That was the needle Sunny was currently staring at, and the divine light on it was emanated by the remnant traces of the thief's blood still left on its surface. But who was the thief? And why was Sunny connected to their severed arm by a golden string of fate? Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then reached for the needle, but suddenly froze. The shadow left behind to monitor the harrowing rot had noticed something. The black, ulcerous flesh was changing.
Here we go.
Sunny faced the stairwell and stood motionless, looking at the black rot through his trembling shadow. Sensing something, Saint turned around too. The tip of her sword hesitantly rose into the air. The next few moments were going to decide whether he was going to live or die, or maybe be condemned to a fate much worse than death. One level lower, the harrowing corruption that had been spreading from the severed arm of a deity was moving. The black ulcerous flesh was rising and falling, as though in the throes of death or transformation. Sunny gritted his teeth, waited for a second, and then breathed out with immeasurable relief. Sunny breathed, "Dying, it's dying." It felt as though he had been sentenced to execution, only for a pardon to arrive at the last possible moment, when the rope was already pressing on his neck. Indeed, the terrifying rot was withering. As thousands of years that passed since it was locked in the Obsidian Tower caught up with it, the devouring corruption appeared to be dying of starvation. The stone surface assimilated into it, convulsed and wriggled, as though consumed by pain. The silver brazier was melting. The growths of the bulbous black flesh were slowly receding, their color turning ashen. The process was slow, but at the edges of the patch of corruption, the rot was already turning into wisps of darkness which then disappeared without a trace. As tension left Sunny's body, he couldn't help but sway a little. Sunny muttered, "Good. Something has gone my way at last." Before, he had been considering his options and finding no possible way to escape from the rot if it was to start spreading. He had considered trying to damage it with broken oath, but doubted that anything the awakened memory could do would work, considering that even the original owner of the seven-fingered hand resorted to severing their limb completely instead of trying to destroy the spreading corruption. He had also entertained the idea of using the cruel sight, which was now infused with divine flame. But something told Sunny that the massive brazier where the rot had taken root had once been full of it, too. That was apparent from how charred the severed arm of the transient deity was. If even thousands of years of burning in annihilating divine flame couldn't destroy or stop the black rot, then what hope did he have? In the end, though the corruption had destroyed itself, neither divine flame nor an actual deity had been able to damage the black rot, but its hunger and the relentless nature of time were. Sunny breathed, "Thank gods." Sunny inhaled deeply and tiredly closed his eyes. The corruption was slowly dying, pieces of it slowly disappearing, bit after bit. All that was left behind were the damaged stone and the memory of primal horror. He grimaced. Sunny snapped, "But also, damn the gods. Why would they allow for such a thing to exist?" Shaking his head, Sunny wiped the sweat off his face, then turned around and walked back to the stone pedestal. Reaching with one hand, he picked up the long, sharp needle and stared at it for some time. The needle seemed to have been made out of polished iron, but due to the traces of divine blood absorbed by it, the cold metal had assumed a faint golden shine. Sonny looked at it for a long time, trying to understand if this was a mundane item or some mystical artifact. In the end, he had to admit that he had no clue. The needle did not turn into a memory like Weaver's mask had. He didn't see any spellweave inside of it either. However, the needle also didn't feel like a simple object. It was strange. He thought for a bit, then summoned the covetous coffer and carefully placed the needle inside. The skeins of diamond string also went in, easily disappearing into the gluttonous box. Sonny muttered, "I will have time to study it later." With that, Sonny hesitated for a bit, then reluctantly headed back toward the second level of the Great Pagoda. He was going to watch the harrowing rot die, and then try to approach the severed hand of the mysterious deity. Sometime later, Sonny was sitting on the lowest step of the stairs leading to the Great Hall, staring at the massive brazier in its center. What was left of it, to be precise. The devouring corruption took its sweet time dying. Even the hunger of thousands of years could not destroy it so easily, it seemed. The black flesh writhed and pulsated, disappearing little by little. Several times, veins of rot tried to spread outward, clearly sensing the presence of a living being nearby and lusting to absorb it. Him. But the profane infestation was too weak to overcome the entropic power of starvation. The silver brazier, which had long ago become a part of the horrid corruption, melted and fell apart, then disappeared into wisps of pure darkness. Soon, it was clear that the rot was not long for this world. All that remained from its vile flesh were a few growths infused into the severed arm itself. Staring at the disintegrating rot, Sonny felt both deep, primal terror and a strange compulsion to try and damage it, a little in hopes of being credited for the kill by the spell. Who knew what reward he would receive? But in the end, Sonny remained still. Firstly, because he wasn't even sure that the corruption would be acknowledged by the spell as a creature. He didn't really know if that thing was alive, for the lack of a better word. If it was an entity, a process, or a manifestation of some profane law that he didn't know of. Secondly, because he was absolutely unwilling to approach the rot, even now that it was dying. He wasn't even willing to let his memories get anywhere near it. The memories were connected to his soul, after all. Who knew if that thing was capable of spreading to a memory, and then to his very soul through the invisible link? So Sonny simply sat silently and waited. After a while, the corruption finally died. The charred flesh of the severed arm became ashen, crumbled into dust, and finally disappeared in wisps of deep, impenetrable darkness. All that remained was the empty hall, the patch of mangled obsidian in its center. A single piece of pristine alabaster bone shining with blinding gold radiance. A sole phalanx of a finger. Sonny waited for a few minutes, gathering his courage, then sighed and stood up. He glanced at the small bone, scowled, and walked toward it. It was time to see what fate had in store for him. Sonny stepped into the patch of mangled obsidian and slowly approached the alabaster phalanx, then kneeled beside it and lingered, studying its golden shine. He was trying to determine if any sign of the harrowing rot remained, but also felt pulled toward the radiant bone and found it hard to look away. Sonny muttered, "All of this insanity, just for that little piece of bone. What secrets does it hold?" He hesitated for a moment, then reached down and picked up the phalanx. Sonny had instinctively expected it to crumble into a torrent of white sparks and hear the spell proclaim that he had acquired a new memory, just like what had happened with Weaver's mask, that memory being perhaps another drop of ichor, but nothing of the sort happened. The bone felt cold and smooth to the touch. There was still marrow inside, wet and infused with bright golden radiance. Sonny tilted his head. Stumped, what was he supposed to do now? In hindsight, the fact that the phalanx was not going to turn into a memory was rather sensible, obvious, even. After all, memories were simply copies of real items recreated by the spell, just like echoes were copies of actual creatures, or items conjured by it from scratch following some unknown principle. This, however, this was the real deal. The alabaster bone had nothing to do with the spell. It wasn't a recreation, it was the original. Sonny frowned. feeling unsure about how he was supposed to proceed. Then, a certain scene suddenly appeared in his mind. Back in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City, Saint stood above the rusted remains of the Black Knight, holding a black gem in her hand. With a hint of some dark emotion burning in her ruby eyes, she raised the gem to her mouth and bit into it. Before he could fully process the implications of this image, Sonny followed a strange instinct, without allowing himself time to think about it. He opened his mouth, put the phalanx inside, and swallowed it. Sonny blurted, "What?" He blinked a couple of times. Sonny stammered, "What did I just do?" Sonny stared at his empty hand, in which a divine bone had been just a few seconds ago, with wide eyes. And then, it was as though a furious fire ignited in his chest. Sonny cursed, "Crap." Sonny tumbled to the floor, feeling a harrowing pain permeate his entire being. It was the unbearable agony he knew and remembered all too well. The feeling of his very nature being forcibly changed into something that it was never meant to be, that nothing was ever meant to be. Or maybe simply not allowed to. It was the opposite of the euphoric sense of rebirth the awakened experienced after completing the first nightmare or returning from the dream realm for the first time. The feeling of your whole body being torn apart and reassembled, only to be torn apart once more. Sonny groaned through gritted teeth. Here we go again. The torturous suffering he was experiencing was very similar to what he had gone through after consuming the drop of Weaver's blood. Back then, it had felt as though every muscle, every fiber, every molecule in his body were destroyed and recreated over and over again, becoming slightly different with each time. The agony had been especially excruciating when it came to his eyes, which had felt as though two white-hot rods were inserted into them. This time was different. The pain was concentrated in his spine, in his bones, in the marrow permeating them. His fingers in particular felt as though there was molten, incandescent, liquid metal flowing through them. Sonny shrieked. Sonny snarled, "Damn it! God damn it! Damn it all!" It hurt so much. However, the torture did not last as long as it had back in the branches of the soul-devouring tree. After a few more minutes of it, Sonny felt the blood weave suddenly come alive and rush through his veins, absorbing the harrowing heat and then carrying it to every cell of his body. Slowly but surely, the pain lessened, but the process of transformation continued. Sonny sprawled on the floor, covered in sweat and breathing heavily. He could feel himself changing. It was a strange and extremely unpleasant sensation, one suffused with a feeling of profound wrongness, but not as devastatingly excruciating as it had been just a few seconds ago. Sonny rasped, "Hell, that was rough." His voice was hoarse and creaky. Sonny glanced to the side and noticed Saint, who was standing silently above him and looking away with cold indifference. He thought her heartlessness galling, with no sympathy at all. At least the happy shadow seemed very concerned about him, or itself. It was pacing nervously, turning to Sonny from time to time and timidly offering its encouragement. The gloomy shadow was currently wrapped around his body, so it couldn't offer any feedback. He had no doubt that it would have just mocked him anyway. Sonny grumbled, "That jolly guy is really irritating. I would rather be mocked, curse it all." Gritting his teeth, Sonny closed his eyes and endured the unpleasant feeling of his body being demolished and reconstructed as best as he could. After a long while, which felt like an eternity, it was all finally over. A deep feeling of relief spread through Sonny's body. It felt more solid somehow. Strong, firm. Resilient, Sonny murmured, "Just what have I?" The voice of the spell suddenly thundered in the solemn dark hall, interrupting his thoughts. Was he imagining it, or had there been a note of dark excitement in it? It said,
"One of your attribute has evolved. You have acquired a new attribute."
Sonny struggled to sit up and then hurriedly summoned the runes. Sonny muttered, "You don't say."
What have I done to myself this time?
The runes shimmered in the air in front of him, and Sonny quickly looked at the cluster describing his attributes. Attributes faded, ember of divinity. Sonny asked, "Wait, ember." This was new. He concentrated on the ember of divinity and studied the string of runes.
Attribute description: deep within your soul, an ember of divinity shines, almost ready to erupt into a radiant flame.
Sunny mused, so I have an even higher affinity to divinity now. Makes sense. He had just swallowed a phalanx of an actual deity, after all. Impatient, Sunny turned back to the list of attributes, where 3 more remained. The first 2 he knew all too well. Child of Shadows, Blood Weave, but the third one was new. At the very end of the list, several new runes appeared. Sunny held his breath and read.
Attribute: Bone Weaves.
Bone Weave.
Sunny let the sound of it echo in his mind, overwhelmed by a feeling of savage joy. He didn't know what that attribute gifted him, yet, but was certain that it would be something special. The Blood Weave had saved his life so many times after all. And after his encounter with the mordant mimic, he learned that having strong bones was as important as having tenacious blood. Shifting his gaze away from the runes, he stared at one of his hands, then made a fist. This was the arm that had been shattered by the vile creature, and then slowly healed while he was falling into the sky below. Even though Sunny had already been able to use it for the past few days, it used to feel weak, awkward, and slightly damaged. But now it was as good as new. More than that, actually, it was better than ever before. All of his bones felt much more durable and resilient, stronger. His joints seemed to be slightly more agile too. His teeth felt as though they could crush stones and cut through metal. The strangest change, however, happened to his fingers. It wasn't very apparent, though. On the surface, it simply felt as though they had grown subtly more sensitive, the tactile feeling of touching things becoming deeper and richer. However, Sunny suspected that the true change was more profound. He just didn't know what it was exactly. Blood Weave had altered his eyes in a very fundamental way, so Bone Weave had to have a lot of promise. He ran his fingers across the soft surface of the puppeteer's shroud, vividly feeling the silken fabric slide against his skin. He thought it was neat. Then, Sunny stretched his limbs, sensing their newfound agility. He was already weirdly limber due to practicing shadow dance, which demanded the utmost level of pliability from the practitioner's body. Now, however, it was even further enhanced. Satisfied, Sunny turned back to the runes and read.
Attribute: Bone Weave. Attribute description: you have inherited a part of Weaver's forbidden lineage. Your bones have been altered and imbued with steadfast temperance.
He tilted his head, stunned by the somewhat expected, but still profoundly fascinating piece of information he just received. Sunny breathed. Weaver's legacy. So the severed arm had actually belonged to the mysterious demon of fate. It was Weaver who had snuck into their siblings' tower while bearing a terrible wound, sliced off their rotting limb, and then fashioned a new one from the parts scavenged from the broken porcelain dolls before sewing it onto their body with diamond strings. It was Weaver's footprints that Sunny had seen in the basement of the great Obsidian Pagoda. He trembled. Even though Sunny had seen many incredible things and lived through many unlikely events, both wondrous and terrifying, he suddenly felt awe. It was as though he was suddenly in the presence of divinity. Demon of Fate had been to this dark island, had walked the same halls that Sunny walked and breathed the same air. The sharp needle infused with remnant traces of their blood was currently inside his storage memory, as well as the diamond string they had used to sew a new arm to their body. Unlike the miraculous black mask, the needle was not a memory either. It was the actual thing. But most of all, Sunny had swallowed a phalanx bone of the divine being in question. Sunny exclaimed, "Crazy! This is crazy!" He blinked a few times, then suddenly thought. Sunny wondered aloud, was this how Neff felt when she first met Kai, I wonder? What a random and ridiculous thought. Then a slight frown appeared on his face. Why would Weaver secretly come to their younger brother's abandoned workshop? What was the harrowing rot that had been spreading from their wound, and what manner of creature could have wounded them so terribly? What could even damage a deity? Sunny had so many questions. Luckily, the description of the bone weave was not over. Several strings of runes still remained. He concentrated and read.
When children of the unknown rebelled against the gods, Weaver was the only one to refuse the call of war. Despised and hunted by both sides, they disappeared. No one knew where Weaver went and what they did, until it was too late.
Sunny shivered. A few things became more clear from this short description. Firstly, it cemented his suspicion that, at some point in time, the 7 demons, children of the mysterious unknown who were also strangely described as having created themselves, had waged war against the gods, or rather 6 of them, since Weaver apparently decided to not join either side in this conflict. Secondly, Weaver's reluctance to participate in the war had landed them in big trouble with both the gods and the other demons. Unsurprisingly, one side would have seen the demon of fate as one of the enemies simply by virtue of them being a demon, while the other would have seen them as a traitor, for that same reason. That could potentially explain how Weaver ended up being ghastly wounded, and why they had to sneak into the Obsidian Tower in secret. These 2 pieces of information were extremely fascinating. But it was the third one that gave Sunny pause. Sunny repeated slowly, "No one knew what Weaver did, until it was too late." That sounded so ominous. That made it seem as though Weaver alone had turned out to be more terrible than both the 6 demons and the 6 gods combined in the end. What exactly had Weaver done? Sunny really wanted to know the answer to this question, and not only out of idle curiosity. He was carrying 2 parts of Weaver's lineage inside of him now, after all. The lineage that was described as being forbidden. Was the reason for that connected to what Weaver had done? Just as always, the answers Sunny had received brought him a swarm of new questions. Sunny cursed, curses. With a sigh, he dismissed the runes and stood up. There was no sense in pondering about that now, not without finding more information, both about the demons and the gods. After all that had transpired, he was incredibly tired and hungry, but mostly hungry. With a resentful sigh, Sunny gave Saint a sign to follow and headed back toward the first level. Several days later, Sunny was sitting on a piece of broken furniture in the central hall of the first level of the Obsidian Tower. The covetous coffer stood near him, its lid open and its sharp teeth revealed. He was holding the cruel sight in his hand. The silver blade of the somber spear was incandescent with white radiance, infused with divine flame. Sunny was currently using said divine flame to roast a piece of repulsive, slightly rotten black meat. That was the last piece of mimic's flesh he had stored inside the coffer before taking a plunge into the ocean of merciless stars. Saint was also nearby, staring into the distance with her usual cold indifference. He glanced at her, then sighed. Sunny said, "Sorry that I haven't fed you in a while." The shadow did not react to his words in any sort of way. Sunny continued to talk, though, unbothered by the taciturn demon's apparent lack of interest. Sunny protested, "Hey, that's not true. It is not my fault. Blame my incredible luck instead. What can I do? The memories I find are just too incredible. How can I let you eat them? I can't." He grinned, then threw a dubious look at the sizzling black meat and sighed. Sunny muttered, "I guess it's done." Dismissing the cruel sight, Sunny brought the meat to his mouth and took a bite out of it. As he chewed, an absolutely miserable expression appeared on his face. Sunny rambled through a pained grimace. "That's the stuff. I tell you, Saint, this meat is absolutely delicious. I pity you really for being unable to taste this divine. Oh damn it, how can anything be so vile? This divine dish. It's the best devil steak you can possibly eat in a lifetime. Just a single bite can really change your life for the worst." At least chewing the damned thing was much easier now. Before the acquisition of bone weave, eating mimic's meat felt like gnawing on an old leather boot. It felt pretty much the same now, but Sunny's teeth were different. They were able to slice and cut through the tough meat of the devil with ease. Plus, it wasn't raw. That was already a reason to celebrate. Feeling his eyes tearing up from disgust, Sunny glanced at Saint and forced the smile to remain on his face. Sunny remarked, "I see you are left speechless by my culinary skill. Fair, fair. However, in the next moment, a voice suddenly resounded in the darkness of the Obsidian Tower.
You actually survived.
Sonny choked on a piece of the vile meat. For a second, he thought that his loyal shadow had only been pretending to be mute all this time, instead simply choosing not to speak to him. But no, he recognized the voice. Sadly, it wasn't Saint. It was Mordred, the Prince of Nothing, was back. Sonny breathed, thank gods. Sonny had been burdened by being all alone on the dark island much more than he was willing to admit. Even though he didn't trust the mysterious voice, he felt relieved to hear it. Swallowing the meat, he took a sip from the endless spring, then looked around the hall and said, Sonny replied, as you can see, although being the honest to a fault young man that I am, I have to admit that it wasn't easy or pleasant. In fact, I can hardly believe that I survived myself. He glanced at his body, which was still in a rather sorry state. His burns were healing, but much slower than they would have usually healed. Even though the divine flame had not touched him directly, just the heat radiated by it was enough to leave long-lasting traces that even blood weave wasn't able to remove fast. Mordred remained silent before speaking again, as he usually did. When his voice appeared, it was full of genuine surprise.
You really found the rift in the ocean of flames.
Sonny shrugged. Sonny replied, as it turned out, I was more or less falling toward it the whole time. But even then, I almost burned to death trying to reach it. My most powerful memories were heavily damaged, and I only survived thanks to a bit of luck. Which was technically true, although not nearly all of the truth. The mysterious prince hesitated, then asked,
Where are you now?
Sonny tilted his head. Sonny wondered to himself, how much of my surroundings can he perceive, I wonder? The first thing that Mordred had ever said to him was ask why it was so dark, so he probably could see something, at least. Sonny called out, Can't you see where I am? The voice answered, most likely honestly,
I can see a big hole filled with ancient, broken things. That doesn't tell me a lot, though.
He murmured that it made sense. Sonny nodded, feeling the pressure of the flaw building up in his soul, demanding for him to deliver an answer. He gestured at the interior of the Obsidian Tower. Sonny said, Well, beyond the false stars, the void continues for who knows how much further down. But some distance from the flames, there is actually a single island floating in the emptiness. There is a magnificent black pagoda on that island, which looks like the exact copy of the ivory tower. That is where I am right now, inside that pagoda. Then Sonny scratched the back of his head and added, Sonny asked, But anyway, how come I can still hear you? Haven't you told me that your voice would not reach beyond the stars? Mordred sighed.
That was what I thought. Luckily, I seem to have been wrong.
After a short pause, he said in a strange tone,
The Ebony Tower, so it does exist.
Sonny blinked. Sonny ventured, I guess it's one way to call it. Then, however, a complicated expression appeared on his face. Sonny asked, Wait, you knew about it? The mysterious prince remained silent for a bit, then answered,
That is what I had been trying to find before I couldn't search anymore. There were some hints that a duplicate of the ivory tower exists somewhere in the sky below. I hope to reach it.
Sonny chose his next words cautiously. Sonny asked, Oh really? What else do you know about that place? Mordred thought for a few moments, then answered wistfully.
It is said that a very powerful being came to this shattered land after it had been destroyed by the Lord of Light. Back then, the sky below was not as boundless, and there were much more fragments of divine flame still burning in its empty darkness. That being wanted to harvest those flames.
Suddenly, a lot of small details about the Dark Island and the Obsidian Tower became much clearer. Sonny already had suspicions about the true purpose of this place, but now they were confirmed. The ruined machines outside the pagoda, the blackened work table, the massive glass vessels covered with soot from the inside, the silver brazier. The prince of the underworld had not truly lived in the magnificent pagoda. It was not his home, just a station he had built in the ocean of flame, which had been much larger back then, to harvest some of the divine fire. Why he had need of it, Sunny did not know. But he suspected that the prideful demon had either succeeded in his purpose or failed, and that was why he eventually left and sealed the Obsidian Tower, which then stood abandoned for thousands of years. And at some point during that time, another child of the unknown had come here for a short while, although their purpose was very different. This revelation came and went. There was a question burning in his mind that had nothing to do with such distant past. Instead, it was much more pressing. Sunny swallowed another piece of meat and asked casually. Harvest divine flames. Very interesting. Was that why you wanted to come here too? Or had Mordred been after something else? Was after something else? The Lost Prince laughed.
No, not really. In fact, I wasn't that interested in the Obsidian Tower itself, to begin with.
Sunny frowned. Sunny asked, "Why did you want to find it if you weren't interested in it?" Mordred sighed. After a long pause, he answered, his voice dark and full of suppressed emotion.
What I was interested in was not the copy, but the original, the Ivory Tower. The two are supposed to be connected somehow. If one finds that connection, they might just be able to reach past the crushing and step foot on the Heavenly Isle.
Sunny remained silent for a while, thinking feverishly. A bridge between the two towers. That was his chance to escape this dismal place and return to the real world. The problem was, he had no clue what this connection Mordred had told him about was. However, he had an idea. In the past several days, Sunny had explored the rest of the Obsidian, of the Ebony Tower. He had made a couple of fascinating discoveries, but most of it was now full of nothing except dust and rubble. Pretty much everything inside the pagoda disintegrated due to the onslaught of time after he had opened its gates. The most promising and mysterious of his finds, though, was situated on the last level of the tower, in a small circular hall that housed nothing except for a graceful stone arch which stood lonesomely in its center and looked like a misplaced empty doorframe. The most intriguing part about the arch was that it was surrounded by a circle of runes, almost like the gateway in the Crimson Spire had been. In fact, that was what Sunny assumed it to be, an inactive gateway. For that reason, he had spent these days trying to find a way to activate it. He had poured shadow essence into the arch itself, as well as every corner of the hall. He had studied the unfamiliar runes, hoping to either find a way to translate them or maybe discover a place where they had been damaged, thus rendering the arch useless. But nothing had worked. Yet, the information provided by Mordred instantly changed his perception of the arch, though. If what the Lost Prince had told him was true, then maybe it wasn't a gateway to the real world. Maybe it was an entrance to the magical bridge connecting the Ebony Tower to its ivory counterpart. Still, how was he supposed to make the damn thing work? With a deep scowl on his face, Sunny asked, if this place is really connected to the Ivory Tower, then how would one go about using that connection? Do you have any ideas? There is something that looks like a portal here, but it doesn't work. I tried to open it 100 times to no avail. Mordred thought for a bit, then said uncertainly,
Have you tried saturating it with essence?
Sunny grimaced. Sunny retorted, Of course, what am I, a fool? That was the first thing I attempted. He hesitated for a few moments, then voiced something that had been keeping him worried for a while. Sunny ventured, Maybe it requires some sort of a key to be opened. The voice remained silent for a long time. Then Mordred said,
No, I don't think so.
Sunny raised an eyebrow. Sunny asked, Really? Why? The Lost Prince answered casually,
Because only doors that can be kicked open require locks and keys. The master of this place wasn't someone who needed such things to keep uninvited guests away.
He thought that made sense, and that Mordred seemed to know a lot about the prince of the underworld, though knowledge of demons was really scarce. Sunny sighed. Sunny asked, So, how do I activate the connection then? Mordred considered the question for a second or two, then said with a hint of doubt in his voice,
The creator of the Ebony Tower was a builder of things, a genius artifacts, but also of practical sort. From what little knowledge of him remains, he would have probably used whatever was at hand and went for the simplest solution. Builders don't like overcomplicated things, after all.
Sonny considered his words. Sonny murmured, "The simplest solution." A seed of an idea appeared in his mind. With a thoughtful expression, he took another bite out of the piece of meat and chewed it thoroughly. The lost prince politely remained silent while Sonny ate. After a while, however, he suddenly spoke.
"Oh, by the way, I don't want to worry you, Sunless, but there seems to be a powerful nightmare creature standing right behind you."
Sonny almost choked again. If not for the fact that he was looking both forward and back at the same time with the help of the shadows, he would have jumped and summoned the cruel sight immediately. But he knew that there was no one behind him, except for Saint. He swallowed the foul meat, then smiled weakly. Sonny cursed, "Curses, you almost gave me a heart attack. That's not a nightmare creature. Can't you differentiate a real demon from an echo?" Mordred remained silent for a bit, then said with amusement,
"She is your echo. Fascinating."
Sonny frowned. Sonny demanded, "What's so fascinating about it?" However, there was no answer. The mysterious prince was gone once again, disappearing as suddenly as he had appeared. Usually, Sonny was irritated by this annoying habit of his, but this time he was glad. Sonny couldn't wait to go back to the 6th level, but didn't want Mordred to see what he had found on the level before. He still didn't trust the lost prince, even though Mordred had been nothing but helpful up until now, extremely so in fact. Sonny didn't know if he would have even been alive without his guidance. Sonny muttered later, "If I manage to return to the sanctuary in one piece, I'll start trusting him then. A little, maybe." Finishing up his meal, the last he was going to have in a while, Sonny stood up, stretched, and headed toward the stairs. After he had received the bone weave and rested, Sonny explored the rest of the 3rd level of the Ebony Tower. However, he had not found anything of note there. He also had not discovered any more traces left behind by Weaver, which disappointed him a great deal. The 4th level, however, was much more interesting. The central hall of it was fashioned into a vast, somber shrine. At the center of it stood an altar cut from a single slab of black onyx. And behind it was an incredibly beautiful statue of a young woman dressed in a flowing tunic, her face obscured by a veil. The young woman was holding a star in one hand and a bolt of lightning in the other. Sonny was pretty sure that she was none other than Storm God, also known as the Goddess of Black Skies, deity of the oceans of the depths of darkness, stars, travel, guidance, and disaster, which was really interesting. Why would the prince of the underworld build a shrine to his sworn enemy at the very heart of the Ebony Tower? Their relationship, it seemed, was not as simple as Sonny had thought. He had been much more interested in the altar itself, though. After finding the shrine, Sonny had tried to place magical coins on the onyx surface and even spilled a bit of his blood on it. But this time, the gods had not answered. The coins, too, simply remained laying on the altar instead of turning into shadow essence. It seemed that the altar was not mystical at all. In fact, as far as altars go, this one appeared to be quite mundane. Sonny had quickly lost interest and continued exploring the Great Pagoda, and he had not been disappointed by that decision, because there was something very, very important on the 5th level of the Ebony Tower. The 5th level of the Ebony Tower had almost killed Sonny. It was completely empty, its black walls drowning in darkness and unadorned. There was no dust, no ruined pieces of furniture, tools, or strange metal devices, not even lanterns. There were, however, countless runes carved into the walls themselves, and almost all of those runes were of the kind that radiated a sickening, dire sensation that made one feel as though their mind was breaking apart. The same mysterious runes that the spell used to describe the unknown, and that Sonny had seen written on the floor by the prisoner of the small cell that was hidden under the ruined cathedral in the Dark City. Back then, looking at them dealt a heavy blow to Sonny, but he persisted, and was eventually able to read a single phrase that the prisoner had written, unlike everything else in a familiar script. "Hail Weaver, demon of fate, firstborn of the unknown." On the second to last level of the Ebony Tower, however, there were much more of the terrible runes, and most of them seemed far more intense, far more powerful. When Sonny had first set foot into the dark hall, he yelped and jumped back, then rolled down the spiraling stairs all the way back to the shrine of the storm god. Good thing his bones were now much more hardy. Eventually, however, he had returned to the Hall of Runes. Sonny knew that looking at the vile writings could destroy his sanity, maybe even outright kill him, so he had done so with his eyes closed and while leaving the shadows behind, so that they, too, could not see the ancient walls. Even then, he felt a terrible pressure constantly assaulting his mind. He was not going to leave without learning at least something from this chamber of secrets. Where else would he ever be able to study writing left behind by an actual demon? So, he tried to limit the scope of what he saw and glance at the obsidian walls, one little section at a time. The experience was nothing short of horrid, but at least tolerable. And only when Sonny summoned Weaver's mask was he able to look at the portions of the hall without feeling like passing out or falling down in a fit of convulsions. The forbidden runes turned less dreadful, but did not give up their secrets. He didn't know their language after all. The spell, too, either refused or failed to translate them. His exploration, however, was not for naught, because while slowly moving around the dark hall, he discovered something extremely valuable. It was a map, or rather a strange semblance of one. Both the runes and the images constituting the map were cut into the stone, their lines smooth and deep. Sonny did not know what tool the prince of the underworld had wielded to leave these markings behind, but imagined him simply using his nail to cut into the indestructible stone that even divine fire couldn't destroy. At the center of the map, jagged mountains were depicted, shrouded by mist. Directly south of them, an island with a familiar silhouette of a graceful pagoda floated above flames. Even further south, separated from the mountains by a vast emptiness, was a mighty castle. Far to the west, a snowy peak stood near a fuming volcano, and nestled between them was an arched bridge. Southwest, a strange ship floated on ghostly waves. Southeast of the mountains, divided from them by a long stretch of nothingness, a perfectly symmetrical pyramid was cut into the obsidian wall. And lastly, to the north, further away than any other image above all of them, was a familiar shape. A fearsome mask stared at Sonny, crowned with 3 horns. Weaver's mask. The map was strange, however, because the areas she depicted seemed disconnected somehow. There were no borders, no terrain, no measure of distance between them. The ideas of north, south, east, and west were only something Sonny had assigned to the map out of habit. Truly, it could have been the exact opposite, or impossible to apply to the logic of the map altogether. But at the same time, it fit with the geography of the dream realm as he knew it, somewhat. Each of the images had an inscription near them, written in a runic language that Sonny had trouble understanding. It was similar to the one used by the spell, but also different enough to make translation either impossible or difficult. But even without reading the inscriptions, he easily guessed what the images meant. The mountains depicted in the center of the map were, of course, the Hollow Mountains. Even if the image itself was only familiar, their closeness to the Ivory Tower cemented that conclusion. The Ivory Tower, of course, represented the Chained Isles. The castle to the south had to be Bastion. Although Sonny had never seen it with his own 2 eyes, he knew its silhouette and appearance from childhood, just like any other human in the real world. Its likeness was the stage for countless dramas, movies, and webtoons after all. Similarly, he recognized the great stone bridge nestled between a snowy peak and a raging volcano. It was the road to Ravenheart, the great citadel ruled by Clan Song. Knowing the position of Bastion and Ravenheart, it wasn't hard to surmise that the ship sailing on the ghostly waves represented the Stormsea, where the citadel of the 3rd great clan, House of Night, was located. Sonny had no idea what the pyramid to the east represented. The 7th image, however, was rather clear. It meant Weaver. By knowing who it described, he was also able to translate the inscription near the depiction of the mask. It read, "Fate." There was another symbol near it, though, which meant something akin to a question mark and inquiry. So actually it was fate. Basically, even the prince of the underworld had no idea where his eldest sibling lived. And this was what the images were in Sunny's mind. They represented the 7 demons, or rather their domains, which was nothing short of tantalizing in and of itself, but also meant several things. Firstly, that the 3 great clans had inherited their citadels from 3 demons, or at least built their strongholds in the regions of the dream realm where demons had once dwelt. Secondly, that the underworld, most likely, was situated beneath the Hollow Mountains. This death zone was the very dark and cavernous domain to which the prince of the underworld had retreated after his conflict with the gods of the black skies. And lastly, that the ruler of the beautiful and prosperous land that had invoked the wrath of Sun God and doomed their kingdom to destruction, an eventual transformation into the Chained Isles, was a demon as well. Coincidentally, the inscription cut into the stone near the image of the ivory tower was the only one after that of weavers that Sunny was able to translate, since the runes closely resembled those usually used by the spell. It was desire. The other meaning of the runes, however, was hope. The ivory tower had once belonged to the demon of hope. That revelation had given Sunny a lot to think about. The demon of hope, or desire, a demon whose power was most likely tied to souls and mind. What act could such a being have committed to cause Sun God to destroy their whole domain? And what had happened to that being after? Just as usual, there were no answers. Sunny was slowly learning more and more, though. For now, the pieces of information he had earned were scattered and disconnected. But if he continued to slowly accumulate knowledge, one day they were going to start clicking together. And then, what terrible and wondrous truths would he uncover? Enough to make up for a lifetime of lies, perhaps. Apart from inscriptions dedicated to Weaver and the ivory tower, Sunny failed to translate anything else. He had, however, memorized every little detail of the unfamiliar runes describing the Hollow Mountains, Bastion Ravenhere, a ship sailing on the storm sea, and the mysterious pyramid to the east. Sunny mused that he would have to visit teacher Julius when he was back in the real world. And that Julius surely had to know something about this script. Thinking about the map, Sunny entered the rune hall, kept his eyes closed, and walked to the entrance to the stairwell leading to the 6th level of the Ebony Tower, the last one. When he entered the chamber of the stone arch, he sighed with relief. The pressure emanated by the terrifying runes was finally gone, leaving his mind at ease. The headache caused by them, however, was going to persist for a few more minutes. Sunny sat down, leaned his back against the wall, and stared at the arch while waiting to fully recover. The highest level of the Great Pagoda was not very large in comparison to the 6 others. It was just one big hall, circular in shape and almost completely empty. The only thing inside of it was the arch itself. It was tall and composed of the same material as the rest of the Ebony Tower. In fact, the arch didn't seem to have been built. Instead, it was almost as though it had simply grown out of the floor, without any seams separating it from the black stone. It looked like a doorway that someone had put in the middle of the chamber for some reason and then forgot to attach a door to it. This was Sunny's only hope of escape. He stared at it for a long time, thinking about how to make the portal work. In the past, he had tried a lot of things to activate the arch, as well as studying the circle of runes surrounding it. But nothing he had done accomplished anything. His recent conversation with Mordred, however, had given Sunny an idea. What had Mordred said? That the prince of the underworld was somewhat of a divine smith, a builder of things, but also of the practical sort, that he would have used whatever was at hand, going for the simplest solution. That more or less confirmed what Sunny knew of the prideful demon already. After all, Saint and her kin had been created by the prince of the underworld. In retrospect, Sunny had completely failed to understand the magnitude of that accomplishment. To create a living being from nothing, a whole race of them, really. That did sound like something that only a god would be able to do, didn't it? The prince of the underworld, however, was not a god. He was a demon, a lesser deity. Was the creation of Saint and her people his way of showing the true divinities that he was in no way inferior to them? Or was he guided by some different ambition? Sunny wondered aloud how the gods might have reacted. Teacher Julius had described demons as terrible beings that inspired fear because of their unknown origins and strange powers. What happened after one of them had accomplished something that was supposed to be in the purview of only the gods? Saint's description, back when was an echo, said that she and her kin were designed to bring peace, but were born into an endless war instead. But regardless, that was not the point. The point was that Saint was made out of stone. Sunny had always thought that it was an integral part of her design, a fundamental aspect of the vision her creator had for the living statues, to make them stronger, perhaps, or harder to destroy. But after witnessing the porcelain dolls and speaking with Mordred, Sunny was not so sure anymore. The broken dolls showed that the material from which to make his creations had not mattered to the prince of the underworld too much. Sunny murmured about what was at hand and the simplest solution. Was Saint made out of stone? Simply because there was a lot of stone in the hollow mountains for its prince to use in his experiments. There was nothing but stone there, really. Sunny ventured that that couldn't be right, could it? But somehow, Sunny felt that it was indeed right. He glanced at Saint and blinked a couple of times. A lazy bastard. Sunny shivered, half expecting to be struck down for thinking about the mighty demon in such unflattering terms. When nothing happened, he shook his head and returned to his thoughts. There was plenty of stone in the hollow mountains, but there was literally nothing around the Ebony Tower. But what about in the past? What had there been a lot of around it back at the time the prince of the underworld resided in the sky below? What would he have used to power his magical engines? This pagoda had been built to harvest divine flames after all. Feeling the headache finally retreat, Sunny stood up and walked over to the arch. Then he summoned the cruel sight, activated the dark mirror enchantment, and poured his essence into it, watching the silver blade become infused with incandescent white light. Then he hesitated for a moment, and lightly pressed the tip of the somber spear against the cold black stone. Immediately, it was as though the floodgates had been open in his soul. The shadow essence flowed into the cruel sight, and through it, the divine flame flowed into the arch. Sunny staggered. In just a few seconds, all of his essence was spent. However, the portal did not open. Something in the hall did change, though. The circle of runes surrounding the obsidian arch began to glow with weak, shimmering light. That light was dim and barely visible, but it was without a doubt there. Sunny stared at the runes for a long time, and then a wide grin appeared on his face. Sunny breathed a triumphant bingo. For the next few days, Sunny's life became rather monotonous. He would meditate while circulating the shadow essence through the coils of the soul serpent to enhance the speed of its recovery, pour it into the obsidian arch, and repeat the process. With each cycle, the runes surrounding the portal became brighter and brighter. The portal was slowly coming to life, filling Sunny with hope so intense that he struggled to contain it. He had no doubt that he would be able to activate the arch, and then he would go to the ivory tower, find a way to descend back to the chained aisles, somehow, and return to the real world. And buy a new refrigerator. Sunny added that he would stock it with all kinds of food. Sitting on the stone floor of the highest level of the Ebony Tower, Sunny looked at the covetous coffer, which stood nearby with a resentful expression. He knew full well that there was no meat left there, or any other kind of food. Who knew he would miss the vile flesh of the mordant mimic one day? Sunny conceded that one should never say never. Sunny was close to fully replenishing the shadow essence, so his thoughts began to wander. Out of boredom, he dove into the soul sea, stared at the shadows for some time, then paced around, then summoned some of his memories and read their descriptions for the 100th time, then stared at the looming black suns of his shadow cores, then paced some more, then summoned a few other memories. Sunny muttered that it was boring, so boring. After a while, something finally attracted his attention. The runes of Weaver's mask had apparently changed a little. Before there was a, in place of the name of its third enchantment, after Sunny had activated that enchantment, almost frying his brain in the process. The name changed, however. He blinked a few times, then looked at the runes again. Sunny asked if he had read it right, but no, there was no mistake. The first two enchantments were just as before. Mantle of Lies and Simple Trick. The third one, however, now had new runes describing it. Memory enchantment. Where is my eye? Where is my eye? Enchantment description. Helps the wielder peer into the tapestry of fate. Sunny looked at the runes with a deadpan expression for a few moments, and then laughed so hard that it threw him out of the soul sea. Sunny gasped between laughs about, oh gods, where was his eye and how priceless it was. By the time he was done laughing at Weaver's strange naming sensibility, the cycle of restoring the shadow essence was complete. Sunny shook his head, smiled, then stood up and summoned the cruel sight. By now, the circle of runes was burning with a furious white radiance, turning the somber black hall into a stark tapestry of darkness and light. It seemed as though the air inside the arch was rippling slightly, hazy from heat. He walked toward the obsidian arch and, without wasting any time, touched it with the tip of the silver spear. Once again, his soul essence was devoured at terrible speed. This time, however, only half of it was consumed. As bright light suddenly hit Sunny in the eyes, he took an involuntary step back and raised a hand to shield them. A cool breeze caressed his face and he could suddenly smell bark, grass, soil, life. When his eyes adjusted to the brightness, Sunny slowly lowered his hand and looked at the arch with a bewildered expression. It was as though a rift in reality appeared inside the ebony tower. All around the portal, the hall was just as it had been, dark, somber, cut from lusterless black stone. Inside the portal, however, was a clear blue sky. Sunlight had suddenly invaded the ebony tower after thousands of years spent in utter darkness, and brought with it the sounds of the wind and the rustling of leaves. Sunny could see the skies, but also the ground. A beautiful green meadow continued from where the obsidian floor ended, full of vibrancy and life. A shadow of a tall tree shaded the proximity of the portal, and there was a path of white stone leading from it toward. Some distance away, a pristine white wall rose higher than Sunny could see through the portal. Surrounded by the blue skies, clouds, and vibrant green grass, it seemed to be the epitome of beauty and tranquility. The whole site was like a paradise. He swallowed. Sunny breathed that it was the ivory tower and that Mordred had been right. What's more, judging by how softly the grass swayed under the wind and how lazily the branches of the tree moved, the heavenly island was really. It was really not affected by the crushing. In that regard, at least, it was safe. Sunny exclaimed a triumphant yes. Suddenly tense, Sunny quickly glanced at the circle of runes. Just as he had expected, it was already growing dimmer. The portal was burning through the meager amount of divine flame Sunny had been able to charge it within these past days and was going to close soon. Sunny cursed in frustration. Well, it was not as though he had not been prepared to go through the arch as soon as it opened. He had done everything he wanted to do in the ebony tower, given the circumstances. There was not much to be done here to begin with. Time had destroyed every possible trophy he could have found and the most valuable treasures. The bone weave and the knowledge of the map left behind by the prince of the underworld were already in his possession. Now he just had to escape alive, dismissing all of his memories. Sunny wrapped both shadows around his body and dashed toward the light. Sunny pleaded that it would not be an illusion. He appeared near the portal, dove inside, and stumbled, falling to his knees. His fingers touched the soft grass, and with his tactile sense enhanced by the bone weave, Sunny felt every tiny detail of its texture of the rich soil beneath of the heat of the sun on his skin. It was all real. It was wonderful. As the portal shimmered and closed behind him, Sunny closed his eyes tightly and let out a short, quiet cry. He had too many emotions boiling in his heart to put them into words. He made it. He escaped from the void. He left nothing behind. While Sunny was feeling the joy of escaping from the sky below, something else happened. Somewhere far away, or maybe close by, there was a room built of cold stone, full of deafening silence. It was dark and empty, arranged in the shape of a heptagon with 7 corners drowning in deep shadows. There were 7 mirrors standing at each of the 7 walls of the room, pointed at its center. There was nothing there. However, in each of the 7 mirrors, a figure of a young man reflected. Sitting on the stone floor with his hands chained behind his back, the young man was still and motionless, almost as though he was just a statue and not a living being. But then, something changed. A few moments after Sunny crossed the portal and appeared on the aisle of the ivory tower. One corner of the young man's lips curled upward slightly, forming a hint of a smile. Mordred was glad to see Sunny escape, too.
The saint have come look at this.
Sunny sat on the soft grass, enjoying the sunlight and the cool wind. He had not even known how much he missed them, missed everything, really. Looking back, it was hard to imagine that he had endured more than a month of utter nothingness without losing his mind. His experiences in the dark city, it seemed, made him far more resilient. The shadow of the ivory tower was slowly moving closer as the evening approached, marking the passage of time. It was peaceful and quiet on the green meadow of the heavenly island. Answering his call, the taciturn demon appeared nearby and stood silently, observing the magnificent white tower. Her ruby eyes, however, did not show any emotion. He sighed. Sunny offered that he thought it was lovely. The soaring island was not very large, so Sunny could more or less see its edge not too far away, surrounded by floating slates of shattered marble. There was a meadow on this side of it, a grove that rustles under the wind, and a graceful gazebo built of the same white material as the ivory tower itself. The stone arch inside of it was also white and empty. The portal was gone. Some distance away, connected to the gazebo by a stone path, stood the magnificent great pagoda that had once belonged to the Demon of Hope. If its copy in the sky below was somber and ominous, the original was the complete opposite. It was beautiful, graceful, and slightly surreal, as though too sublime to exist in the mortal realm. In a sense, it did not. Something about the ivory tower made Sunny uneasy, however. He couldn't quite describe the feeling, but it was as though he simultaneously felt pulled toward it and threatened by it. The sensation did not come from his intuition, but more so from the deepest corners of his soul. It was rather strong, and there was also something strange in the shape of the tower itself. There was a weird thing that went around the base of it, circling the whole perimeter of the great pagoda and disappearing from view. That thing was almost of the same color, but slightly less pristine and made out of long and weathered sections. After looking at it for a while, Sunny finally realized what the thing was: bone. Wrapped around the tower was what remained of the tail of some giant, dead creature. He frowned. Good thing it's dead. I hope it remains this way. Sunny sighed, used the cruel sight to help himself stand up, and headed toward the edge of the island. Saint followed, putting the blade of the midnight shard on her shoulder. Reaching it, he cautiously looked down and saw the disjointed patchwork of the chained aisles far below. From this high, they looked like pieces of a beautiful mosaic that someone had laid out on the backdrop of velvety darkness, with a scattering of radiant stars shining in between. Sunny gazed down for a while, then picked up a rock from the ground and threw it over the edge. The rock fell for 100 meters or so without meeting any resistance. Then, however, it suddenly cracked and exploded into shards, which then became dust and were scattered in the wind. Curses. It seemed that the crushing was still there. It's just that the ivory tower itself was not affected by it, as well as the island it stood upon and a small area surrounding it. How was he going to come down? Sunny stood at the edge for some time with a resentful expression on his face, then turned around and walked deeper into the island, circling the ivory tower from the left. On the other side of the great pagoda was a clear lake, with streams of water flowing out of it and falling over the edge of the island. In the bright sunlight, it seemed as though the entire surface of the lake was shining with pure golden radiance. Sunny looked at his reflection in the water, then at an intricately engraved bench standing near it, cut from white stone. Finally, he walked further on and reached a vantage point from which the gate of the graceful tower could be seen. Sunny breathed a quiet oh. The gates looked very similar to those he had opened in the depths of the sky below, with the main difference being the color and the absence of soot, as well as that there were skeletal remains of a giant beast lying in front of them, its serpentine body wrapped around the tower, its massive skull resting right near the tall white doors. Each of the terrifying fangs of the great beast was as long as Sunny was tall, at least. Deep darkness nestled in its empty eyes. He shivered. Sunny asked whether that was a dragon. Indeed it was. Right in front of Sunny were the weathered, snow-white bones of an actual dragon. The image of the mighty creature laying dead in front of the pristine tower was solemn, mysterious, and terrifying. What could have killed such a being? Thinking that he didn't wish to know, Sunny lingered for a while, then headed toward the remains of the dragon. He was desperately hoping that the great beast would not stir and come to life. If that happened, well, it was better to not even think about it. Reaching the white skull of the mighty creature, Sunny hesitated for a bit, then walked between the terrifying fangs and approached the gates. They were slightly ajar, so he didn't even need to use essence to unlock them. Sunny gathered his courage, raised his hand, and pushed the gates open. Suddenly, he felt a bit sleepy. Sunny stammered, asking what this was. Shaking his head to chase the sleepiness away, Sunny walked inside the tower and found himself in a great hall, bright light streaming through its tall windows. The air inside, however, was infused with a strange, shimmering darkness, and in its center there were chains. 7 chains sprawled from the pristine white floor, as though growing out of it, each ending in a broken shackle. The shackles were inscribed with a myriad of runes and marred their metal torn. They were also the source of the strange shimmering, which rose from their surface in ethereal wisps. A chaotic, ever-changing mass of pure darkness pulsated in the very center of the great hall. No, it was not darkness. Rather, it seemed like a rift in the fabric of reality, one that could devour even light itself. Sunny tensed, then took a tentative step forward, hoping to see what was hidden behind the darkness. As soon as he did so, however, a familiar voice echoed in the silence of the great hall.
"Stop, Sunless. Turn back if you wish to live."
Sunny froze, then took a careful step back and stared at the walls of the great hall. Mordred's timing, this time around, was impeccable. It was not like Sunny had planned to get too close to the mass of darkness, but he might have underestimated the danger it presented. To be honest, he felt that he wasn't thinking entirely straight. It was not like he had lost control, but the strange pull he felt outside the tower was much stronger here, exerting a subtle effect on his mind. Sunny tensed and glanced at the pulsating dark rift, then realized that the pull emanated from the shackles that were the source of it. Sunny demanded to know why and what that thing was. The lost prince remained silent for a few moments, then sighed.
"I really can't make sense of you."
Sunny blinked. That was not the answer he had expected. Sunny shot back, asking what that was supposed to mean. Mordred answered with a bit of doubt in his voice.
"Nothing, really. It's just that. Some things about you suggest a certain background, but then there are as many contradictions. Don't you know what a seed of nightmare looks like?"
Sunny jumped back, then cautiously looked at the mass of shimmering darkness again. So, that was a seed of nightmare, a vile manifestation of the spell that grew in the dream realm and eventually blossomed, opening a gate to the real world for the nightmare creatures to enter. The thing that awakened were supposed to seek out and destroy by challenging the nightmare contained within. No wonder it exerted a pull on him. He scowled, then said with annoyance that he had only become an awakened a few months ago. So how was he supposed to know what a seed of nightmare looked like? Mordred spoke in his usual polite tone.
"Have your clan elders not taught you anything?"
Sunny opened his eyes wide, a shocked expression appearing on his face. Sunny demanded to know what clan Mordred was talking about, and whether he looked like a legacy to him. The lost prince did not answer, letting Sunny boil with outrage and silence. Eventually, he slowly exhaled and asked dejectedly whether Mordred was sure that that was what it was. Mordred lingered for a long time, then said quietly,
"I am. I searched for it for a long time, after all."
Hearing these words, Sunny frowned. What? Sunny pressed, asking whether that was why Mordred had been trying to reach the ivory tower to challenge a nightmare. He rubbed his face in frustration, trying to find a way to make sense of that statement, then shook his head and demanded to know why the hell Mordred would do that, when there was no shortage of seeds of nightmare everywhere in the dream realm, ones that were not hidden behind endless voids and oceans of divine flame. These things were not so numerous that one stumbled on one every day, but also not so rare to go to this lengths to reach one. What had Mordred been thinking? The lost prince answered after a short pause, his voice slightly amused.
"You are not a legacy, indeed."
Sunny let out a heavy sigh. Sunny retorted that either Mordred was being extra obscure today, or Sunny couldn't understand him for some reason, and asked what legacies had to do with any of this. Mordred thought for a bit, then said,
"This seed of nightmare is a very, very special one."
What is he going on about? The only thing that differentiated seeds in Sunny's mind was their category. A Category 2 seed would blossom into a Category 2 gate and contained a second nightmare. If an awakened challenged it and passed the trial, they would become a master. If a master challenged a Category 3 seed and survived the third nightmare, they would become a saint. The same thing went for sovereigns, although there only had been 3/4 nightmares conquered in all of human history as far as Sunny knew. And he knew more than most people. How could a seed be special? As though guessing what he was thinking about, Mordred spoke.
"There are a lot of master, but not all masters are equal. There are a few dozen saints, but not all saints are equal. And similarly, there are numerous nightmares, but not all nightmares are equal."
Sunny scowled. Sunny asked how so, whether it was easier or more difficult. The Lost Prince sighed.
"Neither. As far as the difficulty of the trial is concerned, the spell is always fair, in its own perverse way. However, that doesn't mean that the outcome is always the same. What enemies you vanquish determine what memories and echoes you receive. What battles you fight determines what experience you will bring back."
Sunny thought back on his own arsenal of memories, and had to admit that the more unique nightmare creatures he had thought, the greater the reward was. In that sense, challenging a unique nightmare would certainly pose more risk, but also promise a greater boon. Add the existence of the lineage memories into the equation. A deep frown appeared on his face. Mordred, however, was not done talking.
"But more than that, the nature of the nightmare you challenge determines what knowledge you will receive and what secret you will be able to glean. As a researcher, you should know that the lessons humans can learn from the decrepit ruins in the dream realm are not that profound. Where do you think most of our knowledge comes from? It comes from the stories people bring back from their nightmares, of course."
That made sense. There were actual natives of the dream realm out and about in the nightmares, after all, like Oro of the Nine. Even if he was really just an illusion created by the spell was no simple thing. Most of the knowledge Sunny possessed was built on the foundation of what he had learned from the noble swordsman and scholar. How much more would he know if he had gone into the nightmare with the intention to not only survive, but also learn? Sunny glanced at the dark seed. It had grown in the tower that had once belonged to one of the 7 demons. What mysteries would such a nightmare reveal? Mordred gave him time to think, then said in an even tone,
"For that reason, legacy clans, not all of them, but the truly powerful ones, select the nightmares for their members to challenge very carefully."
Sunny lingered for a bit, then raised an eyebrow and asked what crazy clan had chosen that cursed seed for Mordred to try and find. The Lost Prince laughed.
"Oh no, no one had wished for me to seek it. It was my decision alone. In fact, I suspect that only 2 people in both the waking world and this one know about its existence. Me, and now you."
He chuckled again, and then added,
"But that is what makes it so special as well. None of them could have learned of its existence, reached it, and taken its rewards as their own."
After that, Mordred suddenly grew silent. He remained that way for a while, and then added quietly,
"Well, it's not like I managed to do it, too."
He sighed, lingered for a few moments, and then added in a wistful tone,
"Can you imagine what secrets that seed hides? What one would learn from that nightmare? A nightmare. A nightmare that was created from the chains with which Hope herself had been bound."
Hope in herself.
Sunny stared at the 7 chains, finding new meaning in their cruel visage and the misshapen, torn remnants of the 7 rune-inscribed shackles. So the sun god's ire had not been quelled by just destroying her kingdom. He had gone a step further, binding the demon of hope at the heart of her decimated domain. For how long? And how had she escaped in the end? He tilted his head. Sunny asked whether the demon of hope had been chained here. Mordred answered with a hint of surprise in his voice.
You know of the demons.
A crooked smile appeared on Sunny's face. Sunny replied that he did know a bit, and asked why he wouldn't, though truth be told there wasn't a lot of information about them even among the Dream Realm researchers. He then asked whether the ruler Mordred had told him about was one of the demons, a lesser deity. Mordred kept silent for a bit, then said dejectedly,
Yes, I'm not sure that those two words really go together, though. I also don't know what Hope had done to earn the wrath of the Lord of Light. However, I do know that these 7 chains are what holding is the chained isles from falling into the sky below.
Sunny raised his eyebrows. Sunny blurted a stunned what? The Lost Prince sighed.
People think that there are numerous heavenly chains connecting all the island, but in fact there are only 7, and you are looking at their roots. Or rather, there were only 7. Each of them had to be broken for the ivory tower to become untethered, of course. So now the islands are linked by the fragments of the original 7 chains, many of them severed from each other. That is why they are slowly crumbling, one after another.
Sunny thought for a bit, trying to correct the way he used to think about the chained isles. The new information was interesting, but not very useful. Shaking his head, he turned back to the seed of nightmare. Sunny asked what the category of that thing was, guessing that it contained a second nightmare since Mordred had wanted to challenge it. Mordred answered succinctly.
Correct.
That's one way I can get out of the dream realm then. But am I suicidal enough to go into the second nightmare alone? Whole cohorts of experienced awakened routinely perish in their attempts to become masters. What would my chances of survival be with no one to cover my back? Just as Master Jet had said, no one survived in the dream realm alone. She probably knew from experience. He scowled. Sunny asked whether this seed would create a gate in the real world if it was not destroyed. When Mordred answered, his voice was almost indifferent.
Indeed, but not for a long time, maybe in a few years or a decade. It has not matured enough to be able to bloom, yet.
Sunny hesitated. Sunny asked whether it could be challenged. The Lost Prince did not answer for a while, but then finally said,
Yes, a seed can be challenged before it blooms as well as after. If the seed is not found in time and a gate opens, challengers can fight their way through and enter the nightmare directly. The gate also disrupts the anchors of those near it, so masters and saints that enter the dream realm will appear in the vicinity of the blooming seed. After that, they can lead awakened to it.
He paused, then added,
In fact, most of the seeds are not found in time because the dream realm is vast and only partially explored. That's why the nightmare creatures are entering our world so often. Challenging a seed before it blooms is much better. In this case, however, I would advise against it.
Sunny turned away from the mass of shimmering darkness, then asked in an even tone why Mordred would advise against it. Mordred let out a heavy sigh.
Conquering a second nightmare alone is not impossible, but attempting it is tantamount to gambling your life away. The chances of returning alive are very slim. That is why Awakened challenge them as members of cohesive, experienced cohorts. Even then, many don't survive. Most, even. But this nightmare is actually far worse. Entering it is a guaranteed death sentence, regardless of how many challengers there are. Unless...
Sunny kept his ears open, suddenly very attentive. Sunny pressed, asking unless what? The Lost Prince remained silent for a short moment, then said,
There is a black altar in the place you call Night Temple. On it lies an ivory knife. Only those who have shed blood on the altar and received the memory of the knife have a chance to survive the trial that hides within this seed.
Sunny blinked a couple of times. Sunny exclaimed that sounded very familiar. He thought for a few seconds, then asked whether the obsidian knife from the white altar of the sanctuary of Noctis would work. Mordred laughed.
Sure, having both would be even better, incredibly so. However, I don't know the method to receive the memory of the obsidian knife. The ritual seems to be different from the one required for the altar in the Night Temple, and I have never figured it out.
You didn't, but I might have. The image of the covetous coffer appeared in Sunny's mind, full of golden coins. There were almost 1,500 of them inside. Would that be enough to allow him to lift the obsidian knife off the altar? He had a feeling that it would. Sunny demanded to know what these knives actually did, and how the hell Mordred knew all this. However, there was no response. Mordred was once again gone. Sunny was left alone in the beautiful hall of the Ivory Pagoda, staring at its white walls and the darkness that had taken root between them. The seed of nightmare was calling to him, demanding to be challenged and destroyed, or maybe simply to be fed a delicious human soul. Sunny muttered that it was crazy. All crazy. Challenging a second nightmare alone was very similar to throwing his life away, and that was even without the particular piece of information that Mordred had given him. That no one would be able to survive this very special nightmare without a memory of one of the two altar knives, or better yet, in possession of both. The question was, what was worse? Challenging the nightmare, or attempting to survive the crushing? Sunny remained in the Hall of Chains for a while, looking at the seed of nightmare and the shimmering darkness that suffused it. Then he walked outside. Full of thought, Sunny passed between the jaws of the dead dragon and slowly headed toward the lake. There, he sat on the stone bench and stared at the water with a dark expression on his face. The wind lightly caressed his face and his pale skin, soothing the few remaining burns that he had received in the sky below. Saint stood silently by his side, her graceful onyx figure reflecting in the clear waters of the lake. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. "I am almost home." More than a month ago, he had ventured on an expedition to explore the shipwreck island and search for clues about the whereabouts of the treasure left behind by mysterious Noctis. He had only planned to be gone for a week. He had found the treasure, but also fought and defeated two devils, one fallen and one ascended, receiving two powerful memories in the process. After that, he gazed at the tapestry of fate through the eyes of a divine mask and plunged into an endless abyss. He spent several weeks plummeting through a sea of nothingness, only to be met by an ocean of flames in its depths. On the other side of the fire was a black tower built by an ancient demon, and in it was a severed hand of a deity, consumed by a terrible rot. There, Sunny swallowed a phalanx bone of Weaver and received the second part of their lineage. After that, he used divine flames to open a portal between the dark void and the sunlit heavens, and found the 7 chains that a god had once used to bind Desire, the demon of hope. And somewhere along the way, he met a lost soul who called himself Mordred, the Prince of Nothing, a disembodied voice that came out of nowhere and helped him along the way. Now, Sunny just had to do one last thing, either plunge into a deadly nightmare or off the edge of the Ivory Island, to be met with the obliterating fury of the crushing. With a heavy sigh, he turned around and stared at the white bones of the great beast that had wrapped its mighty body around the base of Hope's beautiful tower once, thousands of years ago, before succumbing to death. Sunny muttered that they should get this show on the road he guessed. Sometime later, Sunny was leaning on the wall of the Ivory Tower. He was in a tight spot between the tail of the dead dragon and the white surface of the great pagoda, with Saint standing near him, her weapons dismissed. With a crooked smile, Sunny wrapped the 2 shadows around his body and circulated shadow essence through the coils of the soul serpent, preparing for what was about to come. Then, he looked at the taciturn stone demon and raised his eyebrows. Sunny barked at her, asking what she was waiting for and telling her to push. Saint gave him an indifferent look, then took a step forward, placed her hand on the surface of the massive bone in front of her, and pushed with all her demonic strength. Her feet sunk into the soil by a few centimeters, but the ancient bone did not move, until Sunny joined his shadow, that was, pressing his shoulder against the adamantine white surface. He poured shadow essence into his muscles and pushed, too. Although it felt as though the strain was going to kill him, the bone finally gave. One of the massive vertebrae comprising the dead dragon's tail rolled over, separating from the rest. Sunny urged her to come on and keep at it. Of course, Sunny was not going to challenge a second nightmare alone. What was he, crazy? Well, maybe he was a little, but being suicidal was not a part of his very mild, borderline charming craziness. Instead, he was going to throw a piece of the dead dragon's tail off the edge of the ivory island and ride it all the way down to the ground, hoping that it would survive the onslaught of the crushing. If a dragon couldn't, then what could? Sunny shouted for her to put her back into it. Saint didn't really need his encouragement or advice, so Sunny was mostly shouting for his own benefit, since producing loud noises seemed to help him cope with the strain of trying to push the ancient bone for some reason. Luckily, now that it had been dislodged, the process became easier. Together, they slowly moved the massive vertebra past the gazebo containing the inactive portal, then past the grove of ancient trees, and finally to the very edge of the island. There, Sunny stopped for a moment and tried to catch his breath. Then he cautiously looked down. That was a mistake. If before the colorful mosaic of the flying islands far below was simply a breathtaking sight, now that he had to actually jump down, it made Sunny dizzy and frightened out of his wits. But it was too late to change his mind, wasn't it? Gritting his teeth, Sunny tried not to think about the inconceivable height and climbed inside the vertebra, which of course was hollow at the center. There was just enough space there to fit his body, and that was the reason why he had chosen this particular one in the first place. He lingered for a long time, trying to gather his courage. Sunny hedged that maybe it wasn't too late, maybe he should just enter the seed, and asked what the big deal was. After all, it was just a second nightmare. But no, there was no way back. He simply had to do it. Inhaling deeply, Sunny held his breath for a moment and then screamed in a small voice for Saint to push it over. Outside the massive vertebra, the taciturn demon stared at the surface of the ancient bone for a moment, and then gave it a devastating kick. As the tailbone of the dragon plunged off the edge of the ivory island, giving Sunny a serious rattle, he yelped, dismissed Saint, and dissolved into the shadow that dwelt in the hollow space inside the vertebra. Of course, he wasn't going to try and survive the crushing in his physical form. He just needed a large enough shadow to hide in. As long as the dragon bone endured, the shadow would too, and he would be safe. If it endured. For a couple of seconds, everything seemed fine, but then the vertebra left the bubble of safety surrounding the heavenly island, and suddenly, an inconceivable pressure struck it from all sides like a hammer of a wrathful god, making the porcelain bone produce terrifying cracking noises. Once again, Sunny was plummeting with terrible speed through the sky. Only this time, the vehicle he had chosen to transport him was even stranger, as well as spinning like crazy with the wind roaring deafeningly all around. Luckily, he couldn't get sick as a shadow. Otherwise, his already empty stomach would have become emptier. Sunny cursed at the bone not to break, calling it a damn bone. The vertebra of the dead dragon was cracking and slowly breaking apart, but miraculously still holding together. At this height, the crushing was deadly enough to pulverize the flesh of a saint, a bona fide demigod, into a bloody paste, maybe even a big red cloud. But the adamantine dragon bone was only now beginning to slowly crumble apart. Once the process started, though, it became unstoppable. Sunny panicked as he watched Wide's crack appear on the white surface all around him. Then a piece of the bone flew away, letting in a chaotic flood of light. Cursing, he shifted away from the breach, but seconds later another appeared, and then another. The size of the shadow he could hide in was growing smaller and smaller. Sunny yelped a panicked crap. Soon there were more holes and cracks in the bone than he could count. And then it crumbled completely. At the last second, Sunny slid onto the biggest remaining slab of the ancient vertebra, and then went into a crazy dance, shifting from one side of it to another as the fragment spun and exposed different parts of it to the sunlight. Small pieces broke off from it, and then the fragment itself cracked, too. Sunny let out a sharp cry of frustration. Finally, the piece of the adamantine vertebrae disintegrated into a rain of splinters that were too small to fit Sunny into their shadows. With nowhere else to hide, he was thrown out into the physical world, his body instantly becoming the victim of the bone-breaking force of the crushing. Luckily, his bones were now much more robust than before, and the crushing was already not as irrevocably obliterating as it had been higher up. As a loud scream escaped from Sunny's mouth, he continued to fall, feeling his body go through a cruel meat grinder. but with the help of 2 shadows and a generous outpour of shadow essence. It wasn't enough to kill him or even seriously wound him. It was simply painful, damaging, and unpleasant. The tailbone of the dead dragon had carried him down for long enough to go through the worst layers of the crushing. Now, all he had to do was stick the landing. With a suppressed groan, Sonny struggled to control his fall and finally managed to stabilize his body, preventing it from spinning madly. The chained aisles were now much, much closer than they had been before. In fact, he could even recognize a few nearest ones. Sonny shouted at himself not to dare miss, calling himself a pale bastard. He really didn't want to repeat the whole damned process again. Summoning the dark wing, Sonny waited for a second for the dragonfly cloak to activate its enchantment, and then slowly started to turn his fall into a glide. A single thought rang in his mind. Sonny breathed that he had made it, he had actually made it, and crap, he really had. Sometime later, a figure of a young man fell from the skies and nimbly landed on the index finger of the giant iron hand that lay in the center of a peaceful, quiet island. The young man looked a bit strange. He was naked above the waist with several half-healed burns covering his pale skin and a menacing, intricate tattoo of a coiling black serpent covering his arms, as well as a large part of his torso. His black hair was wild and disheveled, and his dark eyes seemed a little crazy. Sonny swayed a little, caught his balance, and turned to a group of awakened who were sitting around a dancing campfire, staring at him with their mouths wide open. A bright smile appeared on his face.
Good day to you fellow humans, say.
As mad intensity appeared in his eyes, Sonny licked his lips and asked hoarsely,
Is that food I see roasting over your fire?
The heavy lid of the metal sarcophagus opened, letting out bluish light and wisps of cold mist. Soon, a pale hand emerged from inside. Jumping out of the sleeping pod, Sonny landed on the floor, felt the ceramic texture of the armored plates beneath his bare feet, and let out a low, satisfied sigh. Sonny exclaimed that he was back, finally. It was so nice to return to the real world. After meeting the cohort of the sanctuary awakened on the Iron Hand Island, he traveled back to the Citadel with them. Some were curious about where he had been for more than a month, but most weren't even aware that Sonny had gone missing. He used the full scope of his formidable ability to bend the truth ever which way, and left them with the impression that his recent expedition had been long but not very exciting. They did continue to give him strange looks the whole way back, though, for some reason. But Sonny wasn't too bothered by that. After entering the sanctuary, he went straight for the altar. Since it was the middle of the day and the moon was hidden behind the horizon, he couldn't use the coins immediately. So, instead, he simply touched the altar and left the dream realm. Sonny murmured that he was home, finally home. Even though Sonny had not spent a lot of time in his new house, the feeling of safety both its walls and the real world gave him was extremely comforting. Miraculously, even though he had been gone for many weeks, his body felt completely fine. It was as though he had only slept for a night. Sonny remarked that that was the magic of technology. Glancing at the extravagantly expensive sleeping pod, Sonny decided that he had spent his money well and headed for the exit out of the basement while whistling a cheerful tune. Then, however, he froze. Sonny muttered a bewildered "what the hell?" Something was not right. First of all, he had never used the lighting in the underground dojo, but now it was turned on, drowning everything with bright light. Secondly, the armored doors of the lift leading up were violently torn open. It was as though a massive nightmare creature had broken through the defense systems of the house and ripped them apart, bending the adamantine alloy like it was wax. Sonny cursed a sharp crap. Sonny jumped back and summoned the cruel sight. What could have come here? Did a gate open nearby? Full of tension and grim determination, he used the stairwell to climb to the ground floor and cautiously entered his living room. The first thing he saw there were dirty dishes, lots and lots of dirty dishes. The second thing he saw were 2 hazel eyes staring at him with scathing accusation. Sonny stammered, asking if he had gone really, really crazy. Somehow Effie was in his living room, sitting in her wheelchair with a bowl of steaming cup noodles in one hand and chopsticks in the other. There was a very disgruntled expression on her face. What the hell is she doing here? What's going on? Staring at Sunny, Effie swallowed a mouthful of noodles and then said in a dark tone,
"You're back. Way to make your friends worry, asshole."
as it turned back when Sunny had been falling into the sky below and thinking about how no one would miss him. He was very, very wrong. In fact, the opposite had happened. About 2 weeks after he stopped answering their messages, both Effie and Kai got worried. Effie went to the academy to check on him, and that was when they learned that Sunny moved out of the dormitory.
"Bastard, you could have told us that you bought yourself a house, you know. You owe me a housewarming party."
Sunny blinked. A what party? Is there really such a thing, or is she pulling my finger? Not knowing where to find him, Kai used his connections to learn Sunny's new address. Since he was limited in where he could go without drawing the attention of the press, Effie went instead, and when she found the basement locked, well, Sunny accused her of breaking his armored doors. She sneered.
"What are you crying about? Those armored doors of yours were pathetically easy to break anyway. Buy yourself better ones. Anyway, I thought that I was going to find your corpse in the sleeping pod. Do you even know how that made me feel?"
A heavy expression appeared on her face.
"That would have been a real tragedy."
Sunny sighed. Well, at least she cares.
I mean, just think about it. All those amazing memories you hoard, gone just like that. If you're going to die, at least give them to me before you do.
Spoke too soon. After making sure that his life signs were stable inside the sleeping pod, Effie stayed to keep a watch on him, while both she and Kai tried to find out where Sunny was. Apparently, they went as far as contacting the representatives of the White Feather clan. Sunny groaned, asking if they really didn't. Sunny grabbed his head, realizing that he had a lot of explaining to do once he was back in the sanctuary. A cohort of random awakened was one thing. But if Saint Tyrus herself was aware of his disappearance, things were going to get much harder for him. Effie snorted.
"Of course we did. We also contacted Cassie and her fire keepers, since they have a cohort in that remote hellhole you are anchored at, but even she didn't know where the hell you have disappeared to."
Curses. They even brought Cassie into it. Sunny groaned. Sunny asked why they would do all this. Effie gave him a long look, then shook her head dejectedly.
"Doofus, can you stop being such a doofus?"
He stared at her in bewilderment. Sunny asked what that was supposed to mean. She shook her head again and activated her communicator.
"Ponder on it, and while you're at it, be quiet for a few minutes. I need to call Kai and tell him that you have turned up. Poor guy must have flown halfway to the Chained Isles by now."
Sunny's eyes grew wide. Sunny stammered, asking what she meant flown. Effie gave him a pitying look. Then she said,
"What part of be quiet did you not understand?"
After Effie gave Kai a call and let him know that Sunny was alive and back in the real world, they spent a minute in awkward silence. Sunny looked around, taking in the sight of his once pristine and orderly living room. Now, there were dirty dishes everywhere as well as empty packets of takeout food. At least he thought that that was what they were, since he had never actually bought one before. Effie was such a slob. There were even several pieces of clothing thrown into a corner. Speaking of clothing, Sunny cursed sharply under his breath.
"By the way, Sunny, when did you get this badass tattoo? A big, long snake, no less. Makes a girl wonder."
He sighed heavily, cursing the fact that he had not adjusted the puppeteer's shroud after summoning it back in the basement. There were no burns on his skin now, after all.
It's not really a tattoo. It's a magical serpent that helps me control and regenerate essence faster. Don't ask why it manifests as a tattoo, because I have no idea, really.
He hesitated for a bit, then asked,
"So you've been just living here for these past few weeks?"
Effie shrugged.
"Sure, someone had to monitor your vital signs, plus my family. Well, they deserved a break after taking care of my comatose body for 4 years and everything before that. So I bought a very nice place for us and then sort of moved out.
Then an animated expression appeared on her face.
Don't worry, though. The stuff you keep in your bedroom remained a secret. I can't even go up the stairs, remember.
Sunny stared at her in outrage.
What stuff? Oh, there's no stuff. I don't even use the bedroom. I can't really sleep, can I?
Effie laughed.
All right, makes sense. That you are not doing it on the bed kind of guy. Oh yeah, what happened to your fridge?
He glared, then looked away in embarrassment. Sunny offered a hesitant explanation that he had sort of broken it by accident. Then, a sudden smile appeared on his face. Sunny ventured a casual invitation to go buy a new one together. Since Kai wanted to meet, Sunny and Effie decided to visit an elite shopping center in the center of the city, and then wait for him in a posh restaurant nearby. The former huntress also told Sunny that she would hold off on asking questions about his unexpected adventure until all three of them were together, so that he didn't have to repeat everything twice, which suited him fine, since he needed time to decide what he wanted to tell his friends and what would be better kept to himself. There was so much he needed to think about and do. The journey into the sky below had not only disrupted his plans in the real world, but also added new things to his agenda, from training to wield a spear better to setting up a shop to sell the soul shards he had brought back with the help of the covetous coffer. There were just too many opportunities in front of him. He also had to decide what to do about rain, and continue practicing shadow dance in the dreamscape. Everyone had forgotten about Mongrel by now, surely. No doubt about it.
Adult life is hard.
They reached the shopping center with the help of a passenger PTV, which seemed a bit too luxurious to Sunny, but was a necessity, considering that it would have been hard for Effie to move around in public transport, not only because of her disability, but also because she was somewhat of a celebrity. He had noticed at least 3 propaganda posters depicting her, the way she looked in the dream realm to be exact, on buildings as the PTV drove toward the heart of the city. Even he had to agree that Effie looked impressive, like a beautiful goddess of war that knew no fear or would never surrender to anything, not even the hopeless darkness of the forgotten shore, triumph and perseverance. That was what people needed to see, considering how hard and dire life in the real world could seem sometimes. Even if it was just a sweet, benevolent lie, it gave them hope at least. A hope gave them strength. Noticing his gaze, Effie grinned and asked if she looked good. He had no choice but to tell the truth. Sunny conceded with a reluctant nod. She giggled.
Do you remember how Scar and Park came up with a story to make me seem like some kind of a folk hero in the outer settlement, back when Gunlog's people were searching for me? Well, the government ran wild with it, as you can see, plus the fact that I was in charge of the first line during the siege. They made me into a poster girl for the young generation of the awakened, right after Nephi's, of course.
Her face suddenly grew dark and solemn. After a long pause, Effie added,
It's a shame that neither of them lived long enough to see their stupid story become a worldwide hit. Park would have been so full of himself now if he did. I can just about hear him boast.
And that was the bitter truth that people didn't get to see. The terrible price of the triumph they celebrated was known only to those who had gone through it, and somehow emerged alive on the other side. The two of them spent some relaxing time in the shopping center, Effie resting in her wheelchair, Sunny pushing it from behind. From time to time, someone recognized her as the famous Raised by Wolves, and politely expressed their respect and admiration. He, on the other hand, seemed almost invisible. Sunny didn't mind. It was better that way, really. Being invisible suited a shadow very well. More importantly, the act of buying a stupid refrigerator filled him with pure delight. He had been fantasizing about it for so long in the sky below, after all. In a sense, this whole thing had just been a giant obstacle on his epic quest to buy a fridge. And now, after overcoming countless dangers and hardships, that deadly quest was over. Sunny worked out the details about the delivery, and soon it was time to meet up with Kai. He had never been to a posh restaurant before, but it seemed as though his outer appearance was decent enough to not look out of place. The mundane clothes he wore had been chosen with the help of the charming fashion icon himself, after all. Or maybe it was Effie's presence that made everyone there extra polite and a little bit reverent. They entered a tastefully decorated space and saw a tall individual in a black cap and an ordinary face mask standing nearby. The weirdo was wearing sunglasses inside. Before Sunny could understand what was happening, the masked individual quickly approached and gave him a big hug. Sunny muttered under his breath, wondering whether Kai really thought his disguise was fooling anyone and why he was always trying to hug him. Of course, it was Kai. No amount of masks and sunglasses could hide the glamorous aura of the enchanting nightingale. It only made him stand out even more. Sunny sighed and grumbled something about that dashing bastard. The three of them sat down and were presented with old-fashioned, paper menus to make their choice from. Sunny stared at the word steak for a bit, then shuddered and shifted his gaze to the salad section. A few minutes later, a waiter approached to take their order. Effie spoke.
I guess 3 portions of bibimbap, 3 portions of samgyeopsal, 3 bowls of jjajangmyeon, and 3 portions of tteokbokki.
Then she turned to them, smiled innocently, and asked,
Iho, and what about you guys? What are you going to order?
Sunny almost choked on the water he was drinking from a beautiful crystal glass. The waiter, though, somehow managed to keep a straight face. Sunny muttered under his breath about what a professional the waiter was. Since they were seated in a private booth, Kai finally took off his cap and sunglasses, then smiled brilliantly. His voice sounded so sincere that it irked Sunny a little.
It's so nice to see you, Sunny. Effie and I were really worried.
Sunny cleared his throat.
That's thanks, I guess. I sort of assumed that you wouldn't notice that I was gone.
Effie sighed.
I am starting to wish that I didn't, you idiot. Anyway, what the hell happened? Why were you gone for an entire month?
He hesitated, then said,
Do you want to hear the long version or the short version?
Kai gave him a curious look.
Let's start with the short version, I think.
Sunny scratched the back of his head.
All right, well, in that case, it basically just wanted to find clues about a hidden treasure, but ended up almost being eaten by a treasure chest, falling into a bottomless abyss on top of a devil's corpse, and being burned by divine flames. Luckily, there is this voice I can hear in my head sometimes, and it helped me to only get burned a little.
Effie tilted her head and gave him a strange look. Kai's smile paled a little. Sunny took a sip of water and continued in a carefree tone.
Anyway, deep in the void, I found a black tower. There were some broken dolls and a rotting severed arm inside, which I ate, sort of. From the black tower in the abyss, I went to a white tower in the skies and then rode back to the ground on a dragon's tail. That's basically it. Oh, and before all that, I kind of killed myself, I guess. Got a very nice memory out of it, too.
The two of them stared at him for a few moments, and then sighed almost simultaneously. Kai shook his head and conceded that he would rather hear the long version after all. Sunny explained the sequence of events that led to him being gone for more than a month, keeping a few things to himself, like the true number of the miraculous coins he had collected, everything having to do with Weaver, and the real reason for why he was so desperate to grow stronger as fast as possible. When he was done, Effie giggled.
Well, that fated attribute of yours has really been in overdrive lately, hasn't it?
A sour expression appeared on Sunny's face.
I guess I had solid 3 months of nothing too bad or too good happening before that, though. But that's the thing, when it does finally happen, one thing usually leads to another. It's not all terrible, though. I had to work really hard to survive, but other than that, this expedition was a windfall for me.
Kai took a sip of tea and then said thoughtfully,
And what about this voice, Mordred? Do you trust him?
Sunny hesitated, then shrugged.
After I made sure that he is not just a figment of my imagination, I came to believe that Mordred is indeed one of the lost, and most likely an awakened just like we are. Most likely, he can communicate with me over a large distance because of the mirror shard I picked up after putting down that strange artificial echo of his. Other than that, though, I don't know. He is very mysterious, to say the least.
He thought for a bit and then added,
Every piece of information he had given me turned out to be true so far, and very helpful. I might have not been alive right now if not for him, so it's hard to say, really.
Kai smiled.
Well, in that case, he is all right in my book.
Sunny paused as the waiter approached to bring the dirty dishes away and refill their glasses. After they were alone once again, he remained silent for a bit, then turned to Effie.
But anyway, I do believe that what he said about the seed is true. I think I can get the obsidian knife, which is supposed to make the nightmare easier. So, I wanted to ask, Effie, I know that you can snap your fingers and have a dozen of the most powerful awakened cohorts in the world accompany you to conquer the second nightmare, but would you consider challenging one with me?
He expected her to tease him a little before giving an answer, but Effie remained quiet for a bit, an uncharacteristically serious expression on her face. After a while, she said,
Challenge a nightmare, now barely 4 months after we had become awakened. Are you crazy, Sonny?
He smiled.
No, I don't mean now. Both of us need time to grow stronger and prepare, of course.
After saying that, Sunny looked away.
In 7 months after the winter solstice, that's when I plan to return to the ivory tower and go into that seed. Will you come with me?
Effie looked at him for a long time, then smiled too.
Sure, why not? I wouldn't have it any other way even. But Sonny, I have one condition.
He raised an eyebrow and asked what her condition was. Effie glanced at Kai, then said calmly,
You need to convince Cassie to join us too. I don't know what happened between the two of you, but it doesn't matter. Members of a cohort don't need to be friends. They just need to work well together. And our cohort worked perfectly back on the forgotten shore. Castor is dead and Nephi's is gone, but Cassie is still here, and we both know how invaluable her aspect is.
As Sunny's face darkened, she added,
Plus, isn't she anchored at the Night Temple? She can help you get the ivory knife as well. That princeling said that having both would be much better. A nightmare is a nightmare and will be absolutely deadly, no matter how prepared you are. Letting go of any advantage is stupid.
Convince Cassie.
A wave of anger and protest rose from the depths of Sunny's heart. Even though he had time to recover from what had happened in the Crimson Spire and understood the reason why Cassie had done what she had, he was still full of resentment. He was still hurt. He was still unwilling to even think about forgiving her. Effie was right. No matter how he felt about Cassie, she was a boon for any cohort, especially now, since she had grown much more confident in her powers after becoming an awakened. She also had other survivors of the Forgotten Shore following her as they waited for Nephi's to return, and the connection to the Clan Valor emissaries in the Night Temple. He didn't have to forgive her to fight side by side with her. He just had to trust that she won't betray him again, which he reluctantly did. Even though Sunny didn't want to give Cassie the benefit of the doubt, he knew that she had learned a bitter lesson. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. Sunny murmured, wondering what he should do. It was at that moment that Kai, who had remained silent during their conversation, suddenly spoke.
If you don't mind, count me in too. I want to challenge the second nightmare with the three of you guys as well. In fact, even if you do mind, I insist.
Both Sunny and Effie stared at him in surprise. After a while, the former huntress asked,
Challenge the nightmare with us. Don't you have a great position in Bastion, safe behind its walls? Have Sunny infected you with his madness?
Kai frowned, then looked away. After a while, he said,
Yes, I do, but do you guys remember Aiko? She had a gambling den in the Bright Castle. Well, anyway, Aiko has a real talent for managing various things, so the agency hired her as my manager. One evening, we ended up talking about the Dark City.
A sad smile appeared on his face.
Both of you only lived in the outer settlement, which had its own share of challenges, of course, much more dire than what we who paid tribute faced in the castle. But life wasn't that bright there, too.
He remained silent for a bit, then continued.
Aiko had it way worse than I, though, especially after one of the Pathfinders made a point of making her life a living hell. Andal, whose head Lady Nephi's eventually took off his shoulders. We all knew it, but no one really helped.
A heavy sigh escaped from Kai's lips.
Because what could any one of us really do against one of the Pathfinders? But there was a lot of these compromises, of little lies we told ourselves as we closed our eyes to every dark, dirty thing that went on around us.
He looked at Effie and said,
People were starving in the outer settlement while we had our bellies full. Well, it wasn't our fault because the castle couldn't feed everyone. Surely, if there was more food, we would have shared. The guards decided to harass someone. Well, that wasn't our fault either because Tessai was too powerful and we were too weak to resist him. And so on, endlessly. Everyone went as far as they needed to keep thinking of themselves as one of the good guys.
Kai grew silent, then said quietly,
But you see, it actually was our fault. All of us have committed the same crime. We were all weak. When I spoke to Aiko, I finally realized that in this world, being weak is a sin too, at least for us the awakened. So, yes, I want to challenge the second nightmare, despite being safe and sound behind the walls of the bastion, because I never want to close my eyes to anything ever again.
He looked at them, then smiled.
7 months, that's more than enough time for me to prepare. Plus, don't you need someone who can fly? Or are you going to simply jump into that weird undersky again and just hope to miss all those flames?
Sunny coughed. Kai had a point. Sunny muttered that if Kai put it like that, he supposed he had no argument. After Kai's unexpected and poignant confession, they spent some time simply relaxing, laughing, enjoying their food, and chatting about this and that. Kai shared his experience of winning 12 consecutive weeks of the Avatar Singer and having to lose on purpose in the end, and the furor his face revealed, and the subsequent announcement of Night and Gale's upcoming comeback album caused in the music industry and among the fans. He also complained about having to hire a second publicist because of a strange scandal he had gotten somehow involved in on the network, causing Sunny to look away in shame and keep his mouth tightly shut. Effie mostly talked about all the fried chicken wings she had eaten and all the sorts of beer she had drunk, as well as what types of nightmare creatures she had hunted and fried and ate. She also joked about all the propaganda events the government wanted her to participate in, and the various ways with which she had managed to dodge most of them. Sunny shared his experience of buying a house and how it made him feel. He almost got sentimental thinking about his beautiful armored doors that Effie had smashed through and about his new, expensive, shiny refrigerator. Finally, Kai had to return to his schedule. Before they parted, though, he hesitated, then took out 2 colorful pieces of synthetic paper from his pocket with a very embarrassed expression on his face. Without saying anything, he handed the brochures to Sunny and Effie. Sunny took one and stared at it with a confused expression. It appeared to be an invitation of some sort. On it was an image of 2 people standing back to back with swords in their hands, both of them extremely beautiful in a professional kind of way. The guy was dark-skinned and handsome, with broad shoulders and an incredibly masculine face. The girl was thin and languid, with a slim figure that bordered on being gaunter than Sunny had been in his outskirts days. She had a doll's face with big, glistening eyes and full, slightly parted lips. She was also wearing a very strange and impractical armor, a regal cloak, and a very expensive silver wig. Sunny demanded to know what the hell it was. The title at the top of the brochure read, "A Song of Light and Darkness," and right below it in a smaller font, "Light shines brighter in the darkest of nights. Passion blossoms hotter in the cold heart of despair." Sunny stared at the piece of paper in his hand with wide eyes. Sunny asked Kai what he had just handed him. Effie laughed.
No way, they finished filming it.
Kai coughed.
Yeah, the premiere is in a week actually. My agency arranged for me to attend and give a short speech. So, will you two come, please?
Sonny shook his head and demanded to know what this thing actually was. Effie looked at him with pity.
Haven't you heard? They made a movie about us. I mean, about what happened on the Forgotten Shore. Sort of. Have you not heard about all the casting news?
He slowly shook his head. Sonny snapped a sharp denial. Then Sonny frowned.
All right, I get it, but why would I ever want to go and watch this? I would rather eat another mordant mimic. Sorry, Kai, but I am not going.
Effie looked at him with mischief and grinned.
Oh, hey Sonny, do you remember how I said that I only had one condition to join you in the nightmare? Well, scratch that. Actually, I have two.
After a while, Sonny and Effie returned to his home, just in time to receive the delivery of the refrigerator. Two tall and broad-shouldered store workers unloaded it from the cargo hold of their delivery vehicle and placed the big box down with a bit of strain. After that, one of them smiled and asked,
In good day, where should we put it?
Sonny waved a hand and told them there was no need, that he would do it himself. The loaders looked at him doubtfully, then simply shrugged and left after getting his signature. After the vehicle drove off, Sonny looked around, then easily lifted the heavy box and carried it inside the house without any effort whatsoever. Soon, the refrigerator was standing in the place where his old one used to be, the synthwood panels covering its doors blending in with the minimalist design of the kitchen. Effie and Sonny stared at it for a while satisfied. Then he murmured that he liked it a lot. Effie smiled.
Yes, really ties the whole room together, doesn't it? Well, in any case, I hope you won't break it again.
After that, she yawned and said in a tired voice,
I'm beat. Time to retire to the dream realm. What about you?
Sonny thought for a few moments. Suddenly, a wide smile appeared on his face.
I have an errand to run, but after that I am going in too. Oh, wait, we're going to sleep.
Effie shrugged.
Your guest room, where else?
He blinked and asked whether she didn't need a sleeping pod. The former huntress giggled.
I have one, in your guest room. What? Why are you staring at me like that? Was I supposed to shuffle between the academy and your comatose body every day?
Sonny lingered for a bit, then sighed. Sonny conceded that it made sense, and that he should have put one there to begin with, asking what the chances were of him having mundane humans as guests. Then, he waved Effie goodbye and headed for the door as she turned her wheelchair around and rolled toward the guest bedroom. He was very excited about what he was going to do. Sometime later, Sonny was in a beautifully lit store, pushing a shopping cart forward and slowly filling it to the brim with all kinds of food as well as some other things. He was quietly whistling a cheerful tune, imagining all this stuff going into his new fridge. The contents of the cart would have cost more than he could ever dream to make back when he had been living in the outskirts. But now, he could not only afford it, but even do so without having to count his money or feel apprehensive about the cost. He could just buy as much he wanted of any quality that he wanted and bring it back home. His own home. Life had changed so much. After a while, he felt as though he got enough. Now that he had the covetous coffer, he could not only bring soul shards out of the dream realm, but also bring stuff from the real world to the chained isles. That meant so much. An unlimited amount of spices. All kinds of snacks to make the long days of exploring less dreadful, various little things to make himself more comfortable. Hell, if he wanted to, he could even bring a tent and sleep in it like a king.
Incredible. Oh, this is simply incredible.
Of course, not all of these things could be bought in a general store, but he could visit other places or simply order stuff on the network. As he was heading for the registers, a familiar voice suddenly pulled him out of his thoughts. Rain called out to her mom, asking if they could get ice cream. Sonny froze for a moment, then slowly turned his head and looked to his left down a long aisle he was passing. There, a pale girl of around 14 years was standing near a tall, graceful woman in her 40s. An 8-year-old boy with blonde hair and a bright smile was pushing a tub of ice cream into her hands. Sunny watched Rain and her family for a few moments, then turned away and continued on his way, leaving them behind. A quiet sigh escaped from his lips. Sunny murmured to himself that at least she was doing fine, and of course she was, since he had only been gone for a month, and there was no reason anything would happen simply because he wasn't there. He reached the register, then hesitated for a bit and turned back. When he returned, there were several tubs of delicious ice cream added to his cart. As the light of dawn shined on the chained aisles, Sunny appeared on the altar island of the sanctuary of Noctis. He stared at the sky, grimaced at the absence of the moon, and headed toward his room. Some time later, though, he emerged from there with a peculiar wooden box following him with the help of 8 small iron legs. With the covetous coffer in tow, Sunny walked into the garden, found a familiar rock, lifted the toothy box, and carefully placed it near himself. Then, he took out a single soul shard and put it where everyone could see. Soon, one of the awakened noticed him and approached.
"Ah, Sunny, you're back, looking to sell some shards again."
Sunny smiled.
Oh yes, sure, but hey, that's not all. Brilliant Emporium has some new merchandise.
The awakened looked at him with doubt, then asked.
"Really, like what?"
Sunny's grin grew wider. Sunny said it was lucky the awakened had asked and began listing his wares. He put his hand inside the coffer, which then somehow disappeared into the comparatively small box up to the shoulder. Then, Sunny began taking out various items, speaking as he did so.
What do I have in store? Take a look for yourself. Toothpaste, soft, clean underwear, salt, pepper, and all kinds of spices, personal hygiene products. Are you a woman? No. Have a female friend then. What really? Well, with the stuff I have here, that can be fixed. Oh, what is this? Would you look at that?
As more and more people gathered and stared at the absolutely mundane but precious items that almost none of them had access to in the dream realm, with something resembling lust in their eyes, Sunny's own gleamed with greed.
By the way, Brilliant Emporium is also proud to announce the opening of a conveyance service. Want our dedicated staff to bring something specific from the real world? No problem. Want to send something to the real world instead? That's not a problem either, for just a small commission. I am going to get rich, so rich.
Yes, soul shards were a rare commodity in the real world, but a good pair of underpants in the dream realm was, perhaps, even more valuable.